Good morning. I'd like to call this regular meeting of Lane County Board of Commissioners to order for Tuesday, December 18th, 2018. And the first item of business is adjustments to the agenda. And as I see that we already have 10 people signed up for public comment, I'm going to move item 5 up to the beginning of the meeting. So any other adjustments to the agenda from the board? Any adjustments to the agenda from staff?
No.
Then I'd like to start out first by ducking under the table here.
Stay there, please.
Yeah. And recognize a couple of our board members who this is their last official meeting. So I'd like to first recognize our sort of youngest board member, Commissioner Gary Williams, and his 2 years of service here at Lane County. It's been a great serving with you, Gary. Your pleasant demeanor and, just kind of steadiness has been really nice to have on the board. And we will miss you, and we have a nice plaque for you to hang up in your house so you'll remember. Probably goes along with you got about 12 of these from the city of Cottage Grove. So, Gary, thank you very much. And then to the actually truly youngest commissioner.
In age.
8 years of service for Lane County. And, we have to think of Sid as somebody that was the relationship person. And his relationships and lobbying skills helped push through House Bill 2017. And we just approved a supplemental budget last week that added multiple positions in our Public Works Department with the funding that came with that House bill. And now we're starting to get to some of the bridge repairs we should be doing and some of the maintenance out there in our streets. And Sid, we thank you for that hard work and all the other lobbying you did for us up in Salem and the relationships you built across the state.
Thank you.
So thank you, Sid.
Thank you.
And I think the administrator has a few words too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of our leaders and employees throughout our organization, you may notice there's a small army of people sitting back here who came down to recognize both of you and thank you for your service to Lane County. And so on behalf of our employees throughout the organization, I want to recognize both Commissioner Williams and Commissioner Lykin. Commissioner Williams, first, I want to thank you for your humility and the way in which you've carried yourself since you were appointed to be commissioner. You've filled the large shoes of Faye Stewart since he left in a very consistent and similar way as Faye. Your consistent support for staff throughout, and particularly representing I think the largest geographic area of any district in Lane County, certainly, and I believe the largest portions of unincorporated Lane County. Your position in East Lane County requires a lot of engagement with staff on various issues, primarily in the Public Works Department, because there are so many services provided by Public Works to unincorporated residents throughout our community. And I just, since day one, really appreciate the manner in which you've conducted yourself, how you've engaged with staff, asked the questions that your constituents have asked of you, pushed for answers, but always respected that the balance between needing to provide factual, objective information to the public and be responsive to concerns that are expressed, and also understanding the regulatory and service roles that our employees have in the organization. So I want to thank you for your representation of the constituents that you've served, and for your support and respect for our staff and for me over the past couple years. And Commissioner Lykin, I want to thank you for, it's been almost 5 years that we've had the opportunity to work together, and it's been an absolute pleasure for me. We're going to miss your legislative chops. and the great work that you've done on matters like, not small matters like the transportation package, which we are now benefiting from, and the excitement. We had a leadership summit with over 200 of our employees last week, and we talked about the how we have an exciting future that we're now actually able to invest not only in maintenance of our infrastructure, but new projects, largely because of the leadership that you demonstrated. Also your work on economic development throughout the community, your support of our staff in those areas, both on the legislative and the economic development front, and the great work that we've done in really evolving those efforts over the last several years. I particularly appreciated last year and our trip to Washington, D.C., and I felt like we made a great duo in meeting with our congressional delegation and others on both sides and in the administration and talking about the needs here in our local community in Lane County. And so I'm going to miss your leadership on those fronts and your support for me and for our staff over the past several years. So thank you both for your wonderful contributions and service to Lane County.
So any comments from the board? If not, I'll move on to public comment. Commissioner Farr.
I only have one sentence. I have loved working with both of you, and I've told you in private, and I'll tell you publicly in private, I will miss you dearly.
I just wanted to say that one of the things that you see in the public is, people giving their views up here on different things. But one of the things you really don't see is the humor that both Gary and Sid have. And I just want to say I really appreciate that. I think that's refreshing in public officials.
Thank you. And thank you both for your service. And with that, we will move on. I won't embarrass you by asking you guys to speak at this time. We'll move on to public comment. And I will note we have a 9:30 time certain public hearing that's been advertised. So we will take as much public comment as we can get through before that, but I will have to stop at 9:30 and go on with that item. And public comment is your opportunity to address the board, and I will allow each speaker 3 minutes for public comment. And if you choose to spend less, it'd be great. Because we got a lot of people signed up, and I want to try and get everybody in. So the first person signed up is Lauren Bolt, followed by Carol Shear.
Bolt. I am 7 years old and I live in Dexter, Oregon. My mother told me about Camp 99 and I really want it to become a real thing. It's really important to me because homeless people need food, water, homes, and love. I help people by giving them care bags that have water, a snack, vitamin C, Band-Aids, a toothbrush, hand warmers, and socks. People really like the socks. The weather, mean people, and not having a safe place to sleep all make it hard to be homeless. I want you to use my parents' tax money to fund Camp 99 and give homeless people a better chance. Thanks for giving me this time.
Thank you, Lauren. Carol Shear, followed by Kathy Walker. Tough act to follow.
I'm Carol Shear. I'm in East Lane County area. The planet and people are naturally linked. This is profoundly evident in this report titled, Paying for Oregon's Future, Costs Climate Change Will Impose on Oregon's Households. It is a top-down and bottom-up analysis that draws on the work of a team of economists and was directed by Ernie Nemi, a resource economist. You will find this report on the internet at Ernie Nemi's website, Natural Resource Economics Incorporated, and also you will find the report under his name, Ernie Nemi, which is spelled N-I-E-M-I. Looking at just 7 categories of costs identified in the report, the core finding is climate-related costs will in the near future cost each Oregon household at least $15,000 a year. Imagine the consequences. As people migrate to our area because our climate is more hospitable, Some will bring wealth and bid up property prices, and others will arrive with no jobs and a few belongings. Disparities of net worth within our community will dramatically increase as a result of the migration and will be compounded by the cost of climate change. What to me is especially notable from this report led by Ernie Nemi is 20 additional categories are omitted because insufficient information exists to assess costs. Included in the 20 omitted categories is increases in cycle trauma. Cycle trauma will especially impact unhoused children. They will experience educational inequalities, decreased self-worth, and will experience being uprooted, moving from school to school as their families seek shelter. How we respond to our most vulnerable and fragile is the essence of our community. Our residents with great needs must be seen and not swept aside. They should be part of the core of our community so we can best know their needs and can best provide services. We must not increase their challenges, and we must not criminalize their being poor. This is a climate crisis, and this is an economic and social crisis. Let us work together, all peoples and governments, to properly and constructively meet this challenge. I received this message this morning from a friend. I'm trying, but not even going to lie, it's hard. I am forever changed. It's so hard to talk about it, and I'm still going through it. I know who I am at my core, so people's rude replies do hurt so much. If you know any families that would be willing to come forward for me, my 18-year-old would be perfect. She has written 2 spoken word poems for her talent in the Miss Lane County Outstanding Teen Pageant. But as you could imagine, with this being her senior year and getting her college applications in, this not having a home is really hard. Last night, Mike Clark, City Council member, said in the session that to be homeless by definition means the person is unwell. We should not have a governing crisis as well. Please understand the major issues that we have. Thank you. This is a copy for everybody.
Kathy Walker, followed by Chris McAllister.
Good morning. I come before you today because public health is an important part of the county's responsibilities. There is no group of people more public than our homeless population who have no choice but to live in public. So their health should be important to this board. As seen with the 99 camp, it is possible to implement a plan very quickly. Being made up of people who are familiar with workings of our current shelter options, League is uniquely qualified to advise the county on many aspects pertaining to emergency shelter. I believe many problems could have been avoided out at that camp had that happened. The strategies that we had set up for winter were delayed mainly due to the ongoing issues out with Camp 99, and those strategies would help a much larger number of individuals than the 99 camp or Dusk Till Dawn camp site. I appreciate all the hard work done by Chris McAllister, the PHB, and their subcommittees, and I look forward to seeing their winter strategies implemented. I'm poor. I'm one step away from being homeless myself. I could be out there making money right now instead of trying to help my peers survive this winter. My family would be happier if I was. You have an invaluable tool at your disposal that is being underutilized. You have solutions that take all parts of the problem into consideration, and the people who are building these solutions are basically doing it free of charge, even though most of them have very little to give. I implore you to put winter strategies at the top of your January 7th agenda, your work session, I believe. And during the next weeks, while you enjoy your families in the holidays, I ask that you look outside and wonder where the 1,000+ people are that are waiting for emergency shelter. How many will get sick before this board meets again? There are lives at stake here. For us, it's easy to forget just how miserable it is not to have a dry place to exist day after day and week after week. To know that you won't be able to get warm and dry anytime soon is a miserable way to exist. We can do better, and we are the best hope for their survival. If we can feed and shelter violent criminals doing life for their crimes, we should be able to do the same for our homeless peers. Since there won't be another work session until next year, I would ask that you consider giving discretionary and directional permission to allow for humane unhoused resolutions during your winter recess. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris McAllister, followed by David Monk, and I'll remind folks if they wouldn't mind stating their name right before they start their testimony.
Mr. Chair, esteemed commission, members of the public, my name is Chris McAllister and I come from Springfield. I am a former homeless person who came through this community and was supported by nonprofits, by community members, and by the ability to actually utilize resources to move up. I appreciate the efforts that this commission has done to help show support for our strategic plan, and I ask that you consider a couple things going on into winter break. You may not recognize it, but there are unhoused people in your audience today. There are nonprofit providers who have stepped up and helped solve solutions when we've hit our stopgaps. We have a great need here in this county, and it doesn't end on the calendar year. And so I ask that you consider giving some discretionary direction and purpose to our county administrator, who showed a willingness to lead with the Camp 99 and be able to help cause some solutions to happen for those who are pushed on by our law enforcement, who are asked to leave by community members who get to go home to their own warm homes during this winter session. I ask that we consider continuing to support our businesses as they try and sort out solutions and show an example. You are the vehicle of change. And I just would like to ask that we consider looking at some safe harbors, maybe opening up a parking lot to where we can put people temporarily while we sort it out before the January 8th meeting, which is going to be so vital to moving forward. Thank you for being an example, and thank you for considering options outside of one nonprofit. Everybody's here to serve. Everybody's here to help. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. David Monk, followed by Luke Callahan.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, my name is David Monk. I'm a constituent of Commissioner Sorensen. He was kind enough to meet with a colleague of mine, Larry Gunn, and I last week to discuss the possibility of a Lane County Public Bank. In that meeting, we explored how a public bank might operate under the auspices of Lane County and discussed the potential benefits of using certain county resources as collateral to promote investments in the local economy. Based on that conversation, Commissioner Sorensen submitted some questions to your finance services manager, Mr. Tintle. That information, it was very detailed. I really want to appreciate and thank Mr. Tintle for those responses. It really helps those of us who've been looking at this to understand the opportunity for Lane County. We think that the county has an opportunity to use those securitized funds, those funds that you have in certain areas that you keep it for protection of your solid waste management, to use as collateral. I think it would allow you to free up resources to work on the issues that you're hearing about, as well as economic development. So I'd encourage you to, and to staff, to give some time to this, research it for yourself to determine whether this is something that would be viable for the county. Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Lankin, thank you for your service.
Thank you, David. Luke Callahan, followed by Heather Selecki.
Hi, I'm Luke Callahan with Hoffman Construction, and I just wanted to say that I appreciate the work you're doing to commission the scoping study for the Lane County Courthouse, and I appreciate the work that you're doing to provide infrastructure for a safe and prosperous Lane County for many years to come, and as a model of building solid, lasting infrastructure that it serves the public good for many years to come. So thank you.
Thank you. Heather Selecki, followed by Lori, I think it's Hopper.
Hi, my name is Heather Silicki, and I live in Pete Sorensen's ward. I'd like to start by thanking you for all the time and resources you've invested in helping our houseless neighbors over the past year. We have a great need in this community. I want to express my support for innovative solutions, such as looking into like what Chris was talking about, having some safe harbor parking spots, looking at really caring for our vulnerable populations. We have a lot of opportunities for tiny house villages if the county were to adopt the Rest Stop program. We have Lane Community College that has a construction program, a great need for career technical education programs, where they're building these backyard bungalows that are fabulous with lofts. They're selling them for $1,000 on the surplus site. So these are some really nice ways to help support people. We've learned that shelter and housing is healthcare, but it's not the only kind of healthcare. I look at Camp 99 and I think if we'd have just had an on-site medic or nurse and a counselor, how that might have supported the camp better. And I ask that as you look in shelter solutions, that you consider those wraparound supports. We're so grateful for St. Vinny's being able to handle shelter, but they don't have that healthcare component that we need. So I ask that you consider those wraparound supports as you make these decisions. And last, I also want to echo the need for something, well, you guys are on recess because this problem is not going to stop. We look at the weather just this morning. Please provide some authority so that people can continue working on this problem over your recess. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori Halber, followed by Kelly, looks like Mervich.
Hi, I'm sorry, I have laryngitis. I live in Eugene, and just quickly, I have 3 main points. Obviously, echo what everyone has said. Thank you for all that you have done and you're continuing to do to address the needs of our unhoused. And I just want to reiterate what Chris and Heather and others have said about delegating authority over this winter break so people aren't in kind of a state of limbo while everyone is taking a holiday break. The other thing is, Chris mentioned finding a safe place for people who are living in their vehicles. And I just want to stress the importance of that because right now vehicles are still getting impounded, and that serves no one's interest. Doesn't help the county, the city, the tow yards, no one's interest. And then the only form of shelter has been taken away. So I don't have a location for you, but if a location can be found. And then finally, to the extent all of you will continue to be involved to shape what happens with Camp 99 and the transition to dawn, I just want to stress the importance of having a council of campers who have some kind of voice in the transition and can weigh in on what the parameters of this looks like, recognizing that the ultimate authority in decision-making rests with St. Vinny's and the county and the city. But to have a voice is so important, and that has been impressed upon me by all the campers I've spoken with. And actually, yesterday, the kind of wheels started turning to form a leadership council at the camp, and last I heard, the vote is supposed to take place today. But to have a council involved in the transition, as well as some form of buy-in, even in the day-to-day operations on an ongoing basis. Thank you.
Thank you. Kelly Mervich, followed by Sabra Markroff.
Hi, my name's Kelly Mervich, and I've been living from parking lot to parking lot and getting harassed, living in a motorhome. I'm just looking for a safe place to park it, and I'm having trouble with that with no funds. I've been working with Chris McAllister, and thank you for considering me when you're on your Christmas break. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Sabra Markroff, followed by Jan Zoll.
Hello, my name is Sabra Marcroft. I'm a constituent of Pete Sorensen's. I'm mainly here to echo what others have asked for and request that direction and authority be given to continue working on solutions over your winter recess. I also wanted to mention just briefly that I had my heart broken a little bit this morning. Young single mom posting on Craigslist in despair, about to go homeless. No, she had already called all the shelter options and everything has a waiting list. Where is she to go? She says, I should pack, but it's a waste of time. There's no place to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jan Zoll, followed by, I can't quite make it, I think it might be Riyadi. Jan?
Good morning. My name's Jan Zoll, and I live out in the River Road area in Pat Farr's district. And I, too, want to echo what people before me have said. I want to thank Pat Farr for all he's done to help the folks out at Camp 99. It's been a pleasure when I've been out there to see him out there actually interacting and trying to make things better for folks. My main concern is for people like Mr. Mervich who are living in their vehicles and are being harassed almost on a daily basis by neighbors, police, other entities that want them to move along. I would love to see us have, my son has 3 friends, friends that I know too, my son's friends, who have lost their housing due to no-cause evictions. And 2 of them are living in their cars and 1 is living in a small camping trailer, which also has to be moved around town, you know, ahead of police or behind being tagged. So I would just encourage you all to try to find a solution for people living in their cars. I know people in general need help, but it seems as if people living in their vehicles are taking a huge hit right now, and I would just like to see you try to find a solution for a safe harbor for those folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. So I'm not sure if I've got this name right, but Riyadi Million? Ricky Milliken, okay, sorry. Hard to read writing.
Kind of cold outside and my hands don't want to work. My name is Ricky Milliken. I come before you as a former camper at Camp 99, a current resident of the Eugene Mission, waiting to get into their Life Change program. I'd just like to thank you all for the work that you've done, but also reiterate and echo the need for counseling and medical services at Camp 99. I was a resident there and I made the choice to leave. My main choice to leave was because there was not enough services offered for someone in my condition. I am an addict looking for a better way to live and to come out of my addiction, but that was not something that was available. There was no guidance. There was no way for me to actually move forward in that camp. If there would have been counseling on site, medical services, some form of leadership that had a way of channeling people that wanted help to, you know, and were seeking help, if there was someone there to help us actually go down those avenues, it would have been a far better situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricky. That's everyone I had signed up to speak, and we are at our 9:30 time certain. So I'm going to pause public comment. I'll offer people an opportunity after our 9:30 time certain item if there are people that missed signing up. And we'll get to Commissioner's remonstrance then too. But we have a 9:30 time certain, which is the second reading and public hearing for ordinance PA 1364 in the matter of amending the Rural Comprehensive Plan to adopt the Lane County Parks and Open Space Master Plan, adopt the Howard Buford Recreational Area Habitat Management Plan, and adopt the 1994 Howard Buford Recreational Area Master Plan that was previously adopted as part of the Eugene Springfield Metro Area General Plan. that has since been amended to no longer include the Howard Buford recreational area as special purpose plans of the Rural Comprehensive Plan and adopting a savings and severability clause, and ordinance number 1812 in the matter of amending Lane Code Chapter 16400 to add a reference to the plan components adopted with ordinance number PA 1364 and adopting a savings and severability clause, file number 509 PA 1805762. And we have Brett Henry here, and I also have a few other things. Today is a type 4 public hearing before the Board of Commissioners, which is the approval authority for this action. The proposed amendments are subject to the applicable criteria identified in Lane Code 12005, 12050, 162522, and 16400. As part of the criteria, consistency with the statewide planning goals and Lane County Rural Comprehensive Plan policies are required. The order of proceedings for this hearing will be first a staff report, followed by public testimony, and then any additional comments by staff. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity, it's early, to enable a response may preclude appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals on that issue. Prior to the conclusion of the public hearing, any participant may request the record to be left open to provide an opportunity to present additional written evidence or arguments regarding the application. However, the board is not obligated to leave the record open. Oops, I timed out. Call for disclosure of any commissioner, we'll call for that right now. Are there any commissioner abstentions due to conflicts of interest or biases? Commissioner Sorensen?
No.
Commissioner Lyken?
None.
Commissioner Williams?
None.
Commissioner Farr?
None.
And I have none. Are there any challenges to the board's qualifications to hear this matter? Seeing and hearing none, we'll now move on to the staff report. And I'll look to Mr. Hurley and his guests.
All right. Thank you, Chair Bozovich. Good morning, Commissioners. I have at the table here today Wayne Lemler. He's the chair of our Parks Advisory Committee. And Ed Alverson, he'll be able to speak to the Habitat Management Plan. And Brett Henry, our Parks Manager, he'll be able to speak to the Parks Master Plan.
Hold on a second, Dan. Yes. I missed a step in here. I'm officially opening the public hearing.
All right. Great. So I'm very excited to present these two important planning documents to you today, the Howard Buford Habitat Management Plan and the Parks Master Plan. Both of these projects have been more than a decade in the making, and I'd like to recognize staff, both past and present, who've laid the foundations for these plans and have worked through them and refined them to the plans that you see today. Key staff included Celia Berry, Chad Hoffman, Dave Stockdale, Mike Russell, Fraser McDonald, Ed Alverson, Charlie Conrad, and Brett Henry. I'd also like to recognize some key community partners, particularly from Friends of Buford Park, Chris Orsinger and Jason Blazar, who prepared much of the Habitat Management Plan. I'd also like to recognize, and most importantly, our public participants. We had a 23-member task force for the Parks Master Plan and our Parks Advisory Committee, who has ushered both of these projects through, and particularly the leadership shown by Wayne Lemler, Greg Hyde, and Pat Hoover through the years. In addition to these plans in themselves, we are also recommending to you today that you adopt them into amend the Rural Comprehensive Plan. And I would also like to recognize Ellen Otani and thank her for insisting that this is where these plans should reside. I believe that this is the right call, and thank you for your persistence on that. And I'd also like to thank the land management staff for doing all of the detailed legwork to prepare these land use documents to adopt this into the Rural Comprehensive Plan, particularly Lydia Kay and Amber Bell. I absolutely want to celebrate what these plans represent. They provide a framework for the future of our park system and the protection and the restoration of the ecology at Mount Pisgah. However, I also want to acknowledge that these plans took many more years to complete than they should have, because we did not adequately resource these projects nor involve the community along the way as we should have. These are important lessons to be learned as we consider the implementation of these plans. Parks will need to be adequately funded to carry out the goals for the community that are outlined in these plans. And parks will need to continue to involve the community along the way as it refines the action plans to carry out this work. I want to thank the county administrator for stepping in and finding resources to professionally move our way through this plan to completion. And I'd also like to thank our consultants from MIG, particularly Lauren Schmidt and Cindy Mendoza, for working through the messiness that we handed them at the outset of this project and developing such a professional plan that reflects the community's desires. I hope the board will be pleased with where these plans have landed after all these years of effort, and I look forward to engaging with you in the future as we explore new ways to fund our parks and carry out this important work. And with that, I'll pass to Brett Henry to talk about the Parks Master Plan.
Thanks, Dan. Those are great words. Well, good morning. I'm here to present a summary of the Lane County Parks and Open Space Master Plan. If adopted, this will be our guiding document for our park system over the next 20 years. So our first and only master plan was adopted way back in 1980. It's been a while, nearly 40 years, and that document is no longer relevant for a park system. So there have been some starts and stops over the years. Basically in the early 2000s, there was initiative to restart the master plan. And finally, in 2015, a draft was presented to the public. It was not well received, and there are many reasons. The main reason is it included assumptions for park development that were not in line with community preferences. Let me start over here. Sorry about that. So in 2016, the master plan was reset. The county administrator, Steve Murkowski, was very wise in choosing an outside consultant, MIG, to restart the process. And one of the first things they did is they assembled a group of stakeholders. And this group, as mentioned earlier, is called the Master Plan Task Force Team. It's a group of 23 individuals with diverse interests that represented the different regions of the county, and they got together and were a key stakeholder driving this forward. So they re-engaged the citizens and the stakeholders in the process. They identified the needs, vision, and priorities, and they defined recommendations based on the input they received from the community, from the PAC, or the Park Advisory Committee, and the task force. Some key issues that were not in the 2015 draft were increase ADA accessibility, and so it's been emphasized that any new development will have ADA accessibility in mind. Also, some of the funding shortfalls were not addressed in 2015. So this was a three-phase process. Information was taken, it was distilled, refined, and then compiled into a final document. There was a background review. There was an analysis of assets, issues, and opportunities, and public information was taken. Then it was further refined by looking at market profiles, service provision scenarios, and there was an extensive countywide outreach. From this, the vision and goals were developed. Under those goals, they were further refined by strategies. And there's a chapter dedicated to site recommendations for each, or not every park, but some of the selected parks. And there's also a chapter dedicated to implementation of the master plan. Once this was put together, we had a draft plan. It was then sent through public review of our stakeholders and the citizens of the county. And then that feedback was incorporated back into the master plan, so it was compiled into the final draft that we see today. As I mentioned earlier, there was an extensive public review process. The public comment period was open from July to August of this year. There were 6 community forums that took place throughout the different regions of the county. And there was also a survey that was available online. And the county parks staff also had a table at the county fair. So all this information was taken in, and then we had a draft plan that was presented to the task force, the master plan task force, on October 1st. We received feedbacks from the task force, and then another draft plan was presented to the Park Advisory Committee. They provided their comments, and then the final draft was presented later that month to the Board of County Commissioners. The board had one addition that they wanted into the final draft of the plan, and that was the large events task force findings. That was incorporated into the plan, and then a final draft was presented at a joint planning commission and Parks Advisory hearing that was held on November 6th. At that meeting, it was unanimously recommended that the Park Master Plan be adopted into the county's Rural Comprehensive Plan. So this was over a 10-year outreach effort to identify the community priorities and needs. From that, 3 service provision scenarios were recommended, and this was increasing access to water, nature, and trails. These were in line with the Oregon SCORP findings. The SCORP is the State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. And I want to mention that there was a lot of public outreach as well. There was an online questionnaire during this process, a series of community workshops, and interactive activities at the county fair. There was also quite a bit of promotion through many different platforms, which included the county website, videos, emails, newsletters, and radio PSAs. So the public outreach findings informed the task force on the vision and mission of the master plan. I'm not going to read it out loud, but I'll leave it up here for a minute for you to look over it. I particularly like the mission. We responsibly manage, sustain, and enhance our parks and natural resources through partnership, stewardship, and quality customer service. It's going to be an emphasis for our parks moving forward that we partner with other agencies to drive our mission. 6 core goals were identified. Collaborate. This is engaging residents, volunteers, businesses, local, state, and federal agencies as partners in the process. Connecting. Attract people to nature in our county parks by improving facility access, increasing stewardship, supporting nature interpretation, and providing a variety of experiences. Create vibrancy. Revitalize key parks through redesign, renovation, and programming. Generate economic vitality. Holistic park management approach that balances local needs of the community with creating economic benefits and generating revenue to reinvest back into our park system. Protect our resources. Sustain and protect our natural and cultural resources as a legacy for our future generations. And finally, reflect our values. Emphasize our diverse natural character and make high-impact, low-cost measures to maintain our sites, improve park infrastructure, improve the quality, attractiveness, and safety of our parks. Chapter 6 is dedicated to implementation strategies. There are 3 implementation tools used to assist staff and the Parks Advisory Committee in determining what projects advance our master plan, vision, and goals. First, there is an evaluation criteria to create and annually update our 2-year action plans. There is a worksheet to evaluate projects that are proposed by residents, stakeholders, and partners. And finally, there's criteria established to assist staff in prioritizing and sequencing our capital improvement projects. Our appendices contain all our key background data that's found in the body of the master plan. And this includes an updated site inventory, a new habitat inventory, all the market demographic and tourism data that was collected, a very detailed description of our master plan regions, and all of our recent outreach findings are in those appendices. And as I mentioned earlier, the large events task force findings were incorporated in Appendix E of the final draft of the master plan. To conclude, I will speak on behalf of my park staff. and say we are very excited to implement the goals and strategies of the master plan and unleash the untapped potential that we believe exists in our county parks. Thank you very much.
So, anyone else on the panel going to speak, or should I move to public testimony now?
Yes, I'd like to make a few comments. I'll try and make them as brief as I can. Thank
Sure,
you.
Wayne.
Chairman Bodovich and Commissioners, this proposed master plan has been in various stages of development for over a decade that I'm aware of. It has fingerprints of hundreds of people on it. Be that as it may, there are two people who I want to commend for their extreme efforts that have gotten us to this point today. The first is Mr. Steve Mogahysky. This master plan has moved ahead, moved ahead and stalled numerous times. Every time that something came up that needed to be addressed in order to get the process back on track and moving again, rather than saying there are no resources or sorry, but this is the way it's going to have to be, Steve instead said, well, let's fix it. At one point, due to the normal staff turnover, low funding, and the staff trying to write and develop a master plan while still performing their all-consuming everyday duties, the need for a professional consultant group was discussed. Steve said, okay, let's form a selection committee, interview, evaluate, and pick a consultant group. I was honored to serve on that committee, and we selected MIG. Steve went to work and got the funds allocated to support it. There were many other issues that came up over the 4 years that I have served on the PAC in reference to the master plan, and each time Steve said, let's fix it. And with his direction, we did just that. The second person who was instrumental in developing this master plan is the past chair of the PAC and my friend, Pat Hoover. Pat was like a heat-seeking guided missile, constantly aiming the PAC at the master plan. When the master plan target moved, and it did numerous times, she would focus right back on the target. She was also personally focused and a bundle of unending energy. She met with staff, department directors and administrators. She also met with various parks friends groups, individual park users. She even drove up to Portland and met with the MIG at least twice that I know of. The number of times that Pat and I met over coffee to talk about the master plan was too many to keep track of. Commissioners, in summary, even though there are fingerprints from literally hundreds of people on this master plan, there are two large handprints on it that belong to Steve Mogahysky and Pat Hoover. I and the PAC look forward to your approval and implementation of this great master plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Does that conclude the staff presentation?
Yes, it does, Chair.
And and of course, you caught me with, can you grab the sign-up sheet for me, Steve? I think Devin was going to bring it up when the staff presentation finished, and she just stepped out of the room. Thank you, Steve. See, he even brings the sign-up sheet.
Problem solver.
I do want to mention that we have Ed Alverson here for any questions about the HBRA Habitat Management Plan or Master Plan.
Great. Thank you. So I'll move to the public comment portion, and then we'll get staff response, and I'll open it up to commissioners for questions and comments. So the first person we have signed up to speak is Pat Hoover, followed by John Helmer.
Good morning.
You're forever going to be the guided missile now.
Chairman Bozovich, commissioners, Mr. Mogahysky, wherever you are. My name is Pat Hoover. I live in District 5. You know me as a former Parks Advisory Committee member and the chairwoman for 4 years. These gentlemen have given you pretty much the county history of this master plan process. I'd like to give a view from the public, from someone who wasn't on staff or part of the Board of Commissioners. We're here to celebrate your approval of this new master plan, but there also is a secondary celebration that needs to happen today. As you all know, in the summer of 2013, Lane County Parks hit rock bottom, and we all know that history. And thanks to your wisdom, you assembled the large event task force to try to help solve the problems of that disastrous summer. And with the guidance of the chairman, John Helmer, that group spent a year and a half, 18 months, 20 meetings to put together their very excellent report that offered guidelines and recommendations for staging events in our parks. And part of that recommendation, they asked, in Schedule G, they asked the PAC to create and implement a stakeholder-driven, permanent, rotating oversight committee. This is an internal group that offers checks and balances on parks' choice of events for our parks. This is what was missing and sorely needed in the summer of 2013. We needed oversight. We now have that. The PAC put that together with great criteria. It's implemented, it's working, it's ongoing, and it was a wonderful order that the LETF report asked the PAC to do. In the workings of the LETF, in somewhat parallel track, the PAC, with almost no notice and no preparation, was given a draft master plan in December of 2014. The PAC is assigned to be the reviewing body for a master plan. And we were told in December that we were to review that plan and get it ready for adoption by all of you in April of 2015. That's a 4-month turnaround. That was one of many red flags that went up for my Parks Advisory Committee that I was chairing, but we went to work. We did the best we could. We struggled. We were frustrated. I want to give much credit and gratitude to Commissioner Lycan. He was your board liaison to the PAC in the year 2015. Our PAC asked him, please come to one of our meetings, sit in and watch what we're doing. And he did. One night, he sat through a grueling 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. review session, and he saw what we were going through. And to his credit, he brought, the very next day, he brought to you at a board meeting on a Tuesday morning, his observations. And I know that because I was here, once again, testifying before you about the problems with the first draft master plan. And Commissioner Lycan said, we have a frustrated and very struggling Parks Advisory Committee, and we cannot treat our advisory committees that way. He witnessed that and brought that to you and raised some red flags within your group. Thank goodness. Mr. Mokrahysky, I think after a while, he had it with seeing Pat Hoover up here with public comment over and over, questioning why this, why that, clarification on this. The draft master plan was an inappropriate document with unsupported narrative, and we were struggling. And I have to give Steve Mokrahysky, like Wayne did, terrific credit for just saying, stop the music. Put this PAC out of their misery. We are going out of house. We're having a professional group hired to come help us put together the master plan. And that's what happened in the summer of 2016. We went through the process, as was mentioned, of picking a plan. We did an RFQ, we interviewed, and MIG was the final choice. And to their credit, the first thing they did was ask for public help. They put together the master plan task force. That was done by application. We had over 40 applications. 23 people were chosen. They served in conjunction with the PAC. They worked with the park staff, with public works staff, with MIG, and immediately involved the public. We've had 10 public meetings in the last few years, and we have had all the media information that Brett was talking about, and we got the word out, and we did a master plan the right way. The common thread in all of this is dozens and dozens of citizen volunteers, engaged, passionate park advocates who took the time and the energy to serve on all these committees and these task forces to move these documents forward for your approval today. Many of these park advocates are with us today, and I'd like anybody that's worked with parks recently to raise your hand in the room. This Parks Master Plan was a community-based, participatory model for the best of Lane County government. This was government by the people and for the people. And that also needs celebrated today, along with your adoption of our new and very much improved Parks Master Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you for all your work on this. John Helmer, followed by Mary Brobery.
Commissioners, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm John Helmer. I reside in East Lane County, Commissioner Williams District. I'm really pleased to come here for the sole purpose of supporting and celebrating both the Parks Master Plan and the HBRA Habitat Management Plan. As Pat mentioned, I was your chair of the Large Events Task Force, and good news is this may be the last time you have to hear from me about large events. Knock on wood. You doubt it, someone says. A tremendous effort, and in the interest of times, I really just want to thank three people, and actually Wayne stole most of my thunder on that one, but I'd like to thank Chris Orsinger and the Friends of Buford Park, hasn't been mentioned enough on this big day, for their tireless efforts over many years. Steve Mokrahysky, who, as you've heard, really spearheaded the reboot, and more than that, just early in his tenure established such a now tradition of openness and transparency and even a welcoming attitude towards the public in the county's business. And then finally, I have to repeat that praise for Pat Hoover, who was not only the heat-seeking missile, but you know, as I've thought about what she's done over the years, she's really sort of the energizer and the conscience of this effort, and really, in a way, kind of a mentor and somebody who has kept me going over the years. I wrote to her recently a letter, and it was addressed to Pat Hoover, parenthetically, the mighty. And I'd like to suggest that as an appropriate way to address the mighty Pat Hoover. With that, I just want to end with great thanks to Commissioner Lycan and Commissioner Williams for your service. I really appreciate what you have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary, followed by Brad Van Appel.
Chairman Bosevich and Commissioners and Steve Mokrahysky, I'd like to thank you for listening to all of us today. Pretty much everything's been said, but I wrote this down, so I'm going to read it. I just want to thank you, Commissioners, for believing and supporting in the PAC, the task force, and the Oversight Committee. and all of the citizens of Lane County. And I think you helped to rebuild a trust in Lane County government by listening to us and bringing MIG on board. All right, we were pretty much at a standstill before that. So we had several citizen volunteers from Lane County. I know Jerry Mounts rode his bike from the coast one time, and he said he'd only do it once, but he did do it. Came over several times. Pete Petty came from up the McKinsey. So citizens were dedicated. They were tenacious in getting this plan done and approved. The advisory committee was wonderful, led by Greg Hyde. Also, John Helmer did a fabulous job. And there's a couple other people I'd like to bring in, and that's Ed Alverson. He came to several PAC meetings to help us with understanding, as did Lori Siegel. She was there. And of course, Pat Hoover, you can't oversight that one. But I want to thank Steve and you commissioners for listening to all of us come in at several board meetings to change the direction of the parks was headed. So it's been wonderful. I think we've got a great plan now. And the citizens, I think, understand that. So now we just need to take care of our parks, implement the plan and take care of our parks, preserve them for future generations. We've got a lot of land out there. We need to take care of it. So I want to thank the board, Steve, the general public, and all the volunteers, MIG for developing a great plan. And I'm glad Brent Henry's been brought on board. He seems to have picked up in pretty rough territory, but he's gotten on board, and I think we've got a good direction with his leadership. So, and when you're all done, and if you sign something, I'd like to have one pen from one of you for my own personal framing and remembering this moment. So thank you.
So Brad Van Apple, followed by Art Farley.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, my name is Brad Van Apple. I'm the Executive Director of Mount Pisgah Arboretum and a resident of Gary's district. So I'm very happy to be here today on this important occasion. Mount Pisgah Arboretum has been a partner with Lane County Parks since the 1970s, since HPRA became a park. And we care for a portion of that park and provide nature education for thousands of children and adults every year. And it's just been exciting to see this process unfold over the last several years. There have been some bumps in the road. I had the honor of serving with John and others on the Large Events Task Force and dealing with those challenges. And it was great to see the county's commitment to that public process and the openness and working it through even when things were tough. And then again, with the master plan in 2015, when a plan was put forth that didn't make people happy, I was very impressed to see how the county responded and went back to the drawing board and was willing to do it right, no matter what it took. So the Arboretum is very much in support of the Parks Master Plan and also of the Habitat Management Plan for Howard Buford Recreation Area. I think these are documents that are going to help guide the park system going forward. And I really want to thank everyone that's already been thanked, especially Steve Mokrahysky, as mentioned, and Pat Hoover, and John and Chris, and the public, because that's really what it took. People had to care enough about our parks to get involved, and it's nice to see that they did that. So thank you all.
Thank you, Brad. Art Farley, followed by Greg Hyde.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name's Art Farley. I'm from East Eugene, Pete Sorensen's district. I was fortunate to be a member of the task force over the last couple of years completing this planning process, which I think was a very positive process, inclusive process, and I think with the help of MIG and everyone working, we've come up with an excellent plan, and I urge you to adopt that today. What I would like to talk about is a bit then about the funding about the plan, and that was always in the background, not really addressed to a big extent in this process as not the charge of this process, but I think it's important to think about. I think it would be fair to say that the county's park system to a large extent has been ignored over the last decade. No general fund dollars have been allocated for parks management, improvement, or maintenance. The system has survived on an annual budget of about $3 million from fees and room taxes and other small grants that it could get. The result is that a significant deferred maintenance backlog of $17 million has accumulated on facilities in the park. Minimal services and activities in the parks have really been offered for the public over those years. So clearly there are clear opportunities exist to reinvest in the county parks in a way that it contributes to the local economy, opens up new recreation experiences for us all, and protects the community's heritage. Eugene recently passed a 5-year, $3 million annual special levy for parks operations and maintenance. I was curious what it would take to do that for the county. Asking the county assessor indicated that a tax rate of about 3 cents per $1,000 assessed value would yield $1 million annually for income for county parks. That means if we went for $3 million, which would about double their budget, it would be about 10 cents per $1,000. If we look at current median assessed values of homes, this would result in a median tax in Oak Ridge of $10 a year. This would mean for Springfield or Cottage Grove, about $15 a year we'd be asking a household to come through. For Eugene, it would be just a little over $20 a year, median home. I mean, I just offer this as a suggestion, not as a suggestion, but as a example of what it would take to move forward and with some of the beginning implementation of this plan while you really consider the bigger steps you would take. And I think it shows it's clearly feasible, something we should ask people in the county, and I think they would respond positively if we believe in our park system and want to see it move forward. So again, I want to thank you for supporting the creation of this plan, hopefully the adoption of the plan today, and I really look forward to seeing you come up with the staff an excellent implementation and funding plan into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Art. Greg Hyde, followed by Chris Orzinger.
Morning, Commissioners, Chair Bolsevich. I'm Greg Hyde. I live in Springfield. I'm a member of the Parks Advisory Committee. I chaired the Master Plan Task Force. I'm a member of the board of the Friends of Buford Park in Mount Pisgah and an avid park user. I'm here today simply to voice my support for both the Master Plan and the HBRA Habitat Management Plan. And I wanted to call your attention to a letter that was emailed to the board from the task force dated November 1st. And that letter let you know that the task force, that members present at its last meeting voted unanimously to support the master plan. And that letter also highlighted the importance of the park system as not only a legacy for future generations, but as an economic driver for today. And urged the board really to continue to seek improved funding for the park system in recognition of that importance. There are numerous reputable studies that demonstrate that a well-designed and managed park system can create economic benefits for the local economy, and that in funding dedicated to the park system can rightly be seen not just as costs, but as investments with measurable returns. So again, I just want to thank you for sticking with these projects and urge you to vote to adopt both of these plans today. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Chris Orzinger, he's the last person I have signed up to speak.
Well, good morning, Commissioners. Chris Orsinger. I'm Executive Director for Friends of Buford Park in Mount Pisgah, an organization with 700 members and over 500 volunteers helping to care for Howard Buford Recreation Area. We've been around for about 30 years, working in partnership with Lane County and Mount Pisgah Arboretum and the Lane County Mounted Sheriff's Posse on that particular park. And we're here to both celebrate and support the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. We see this as an important tool that will benefit all citizens in Lane County through their nearest parks or their enjoyment of nature. The strategies in particular to enhance collaboration with the community, with nonprofits, and to connect people to the parks will help increase the public's connection to the county park system, and that will be good for themselves as well as the potential for this kind of collaboration that has been part of the history of Buford Park and Mount Pisgah for years, from its beginning with the founding of the Arboretum and the location of the Arboretum there, and subsequently our participation starting around 1989. These kind of collaborative approaches have been effective in bringing significant grant, charitable funding, and volunteer resources to enhance visitor facilities and restore rare habitats, but I echo what others have said. This depends on a well-funded Parks Division that can do what only government can do in many cases as landowner of these parks. Further, I'm speaking in support for the Habitat Management Plan, which is really a milestone in the collaborative partnership at Mount Pisgah, bringing together so many organizations and agencies to generate a clear vision and a blueprint for the future for how to take care of the complex and diverse habitats that people love to visit. And I'm so happy that we are having that plan as a conservation target, visitor experience, a way to integrate how we enjoy the park, how we educate people to appreciate the park, and how we provide opportunities for them to volunteer, to participate in its stewardship. This is a true public-private partnership, and Mount Pisgah is such a regionally significant conservation area, recognized throughout the state, in part for its 1,000 acres of rare prairies and oak savannas, its miles of river frontage, its proximity to the Willamette Confluence Preserve, and the millions of dollars investments in salmon restoration and water quality there. And not to forget a beautiful conifer forest, not oak savanna, that is hundreds and hundreds of acres, 500 or so acres on the north slope of the Mount Pisgah that can be grown into old growth and managed for old growth over into the future. The extensive public outreach during this process for both the Habitat Management Plan and the Parks Master Plan are notable and worthy, and the agency endorsements from Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Arboretum, the Nature Conservancy, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the list goes on and on. It's in your packets. So I guess my hope is that the model of community stewardship that has been developed over the decades at Buford Park can inspire other community initiatives throughout the county to increase charitable funding and also county funding in the coming years, because the needs are always going to be there to take care of these beautiful places, and it serves as an economic driver for our tourism industry as well as the health of our people. So many people in their search for healing. I mean, I'm speaking, for example, of one of our members who wrote a book about her journey healing from cancer by that daily walk up to the top of Mount Pisgah. And that kind of meditative connection with nature is a core grounding value for the health of people. And there's so many more studies coming out about how we are healthier when we're in nature. It's just very simple. Of course, so I hope that you share in this celebratory moment to have the long years of work that has produced this, the deep connection to the community. We really have a right, how we can say, a good outcome after all that effort, and I think we need to celebrate that community collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. That's everyone I have signed up to speak on this item during the public hearing. Is there anyone else that didn't get a chance to sign up? See none, I'll move to staff. Any additional comments from staff?
No, Chair Bozich.
And at that point, I will turn to the board for discussion, any questions, and ultimately a motion. Commissioner Sorensen.
Do you want to take these two together or separately, or how do you want to do the procedure of approving these?
It's two separate ordinances, which you're going to call for roll call votes, so I think we'll have to do the votes separately.
Okay.
And, but I think we could probably do similar motions in both, but we'll have to, the motion should include closing the public hearing.
Okay.
So just if you're ready to make a motion.
Well, I'll move to approve both ordinances and close the public hearing and have discussion of that, of course.
Second.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Sorensen to close the public hearing and approve ordinance PA 1364 and ordinance number 1812. Discussion to the motion.
Well, first of all, as was recounted in the public testimony, this is a long process to get to today, and I think it's worth taking a moment to, as has been done, to thank the various people that have been involved in pushing this and really prodding it along. And those folks have all have recognized. I personally think that a deciding moment in this whole process was Ms. Hoover's initial conversation with Steve Mokrahysky about the importance of having a involved Parks Advisory Committee, and I think that kicked off a lot of what we see formalized by all the thousands of hours of work that went into these documents. So I really appreciate that. I also think that we are turning a corner in terms of the purpose of Lane County Parks, and we have a good planning horizon here. We have a good basic documents to work from. And I guess I'd like to really highlight Art Farley's comment that, having these documents done is really good, but having money to do things is really necessary. So I appreciate the attention to that important component of the future success of this. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I'm sitting here looking around the room to all the hands that went up a few minutes ago, the people who've been working on this master plan and on much more than just the master plan, thanks for all the work, because it took not only y'all in the room, but a host of other people brought this forward. And I think back on when I first got involved, and my good friend Jim Evanuck just sat down back here, and he and I went deaf one night right across the street from Buford, right across the river from Buford Park. And to me, at that point in time, I realized that we had exactly what you mentioned, Mr. Henry. We have untapped potential in our county parks. And at that point, it was being tapped, but not in a very positive fashion. The work that's brought us to this point right now, and the accolades that Mr. Lemler, that you started with, but everybody else continued with, really are well-deserved. So thanks for all of that. But I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a couple of very quick questions, very pointed questions, and I'm going to take this target of opportunity while all of these folks who are so interested in our parks are here to hear these questions. Now, how many county parks are there? I asked John at the start, 70-ish, something like that?
68, I believe.
68. Now, don't worry, because I'm going to ask questions that I do have the answers to, in case you don't have the answers. And we have campgrounds, we have marinas, boat ramps, we have a variety of different parks. Can you tell me how many of our parks are closed for the winter, that are actually, the gates are closed and we simply don't use them in the winter? Do you have that number?
I don't know the specific number, but we do have 3 campgrounds that are seasonal that have hosts and caretakers that are closed for the winter.
And we have, I believe we have a couple of other parks. I think it may be a total of 7. That now the parks that are closed for the winter, many of them, in fact, perhaps all of them, have residential hosts or residential caretakers that live there through the winter.
Some of
yes,
them do.
the answer is yes. And some of them do. And I believe, who administers that program, do you know?
Who administers what program?
The park host program?
Park staff reviews that.
And I believe that maybe St. Vincent de Paul has something to do with placing the hosts in the park and in the camps. I could be mistaken about that, but we do have hosts that live there and they do a superb job. You know, I go out to Perkins Peninsula and the folks there keep that place looking spotless all winter long. Orchard Point, Richardson. So we do a really good job. My next question is this. We have the residential caretakers. We have people living there. And later on today, I'm going to ask Mr. Mokrahysky to continue to look at our parks that are closed for the winter to allow latitude for something that came up in an earlier public testimony, earlier series of public testimony. Places for people who are being asked to move their vehicle along with no place to move their vehicle to. Sometimes that vehicle gets impounded and taken away and they no longer have a vehicle to sleep in at night. Sometimes they take it to a different place that it has to move along again. Well, with I'm hoping and expecting that with a little bit of administration, a little bit of administrative help, we can use some of our parking spaces in our camps that are otherwise closed for the winter that already have residential hosts to potentially help alleviate some of the issues that surround homelessness, particularly for people who do have vehicles that don't have places to park. I don't need an answer to that, and I just wanted to alert everybody in the room here that that is something that I'm going to be talking about. I'd spoken to a couple of members of the advisory committee ahead, and I'd spoken to y'all a little bit ahead, and that's a question that's going to be raised again. It'll be the 3rd time I've asked this question, and it could be as late as January before we talk about it, but it is something that you'll hear later on in today's board meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Farr.
Commissioner Lykin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I get to Pat, I would like to recognize 2 people I've known for a long time, many, many years. First of all, Jim Mayo. And Jim served many, many years on the Willamette Lane Park and Recreation District Board. And so he was a very good choice to be a part of this throughout. And of course, Greg Hyde, who's senior staff at Willamette Lane for many years, and I've known both of them for a long time. And I just really want to continue to thank you, not only for your service here, but really your background and expertise really comes into play. And I just want to say thank you very much for both of you for being a part of this. And with Pat, I used to get these phone calls from Pat. And it was really funny. I would just talk about Pat's work and what she was doing and thanking her. And then I get a phone call from Pat and, a voice message saying, oh gosh, thank you so much for saying what you've said. And I'm thinking, thank me? What the hell are you thanking me for, Pat? You did all the work. So I just really want to say thank you to Pat. I really have enjoyed working with you on this throughout, and your leadership really did set a very good tone. I think you've heard from so many people here. It truly did. So thank you, Pat, for that. And finally, I'll just say this. I brought this up a few times, but in the summer of 2021, there's only going to be one athletic event televised around the world. IAAF World Track and Field Games will be here. And what an incredible opportunity to showcase to 220 countries from around the world what we have right here in Lane County. Because, it's interesting when speaking to the leadership of Oregon 21, we're not Beijing, we're not London, we're not these huge cities, and we don't have these giant museums to showcase. And Vin Lanata told me, he said, you know what, though? They don't have the McKenzie River. They don't have what we have. They don't have the beauty here of Lane County that these other countries had. And that's something that's going to be said. And I look forward to when the campsites have maybe RVs from out of state, out of somewhere, will be here. But this is an incredible opportunity because what will happen, maybe not all the athletes, as I heard from Lance Deal, when he went through the hammer, he threw the hammer and left. So that's just his. But a lot of other athletes actually do their thing and stay here. the fans stay here. So you'll have about a month of people from around the world will be taking a look, not only at Lane County, but throughout the state of Oregon. And so timing is perfect. Thank you for your great work.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate John's comment about economic development and vitality. We think oftentimes about parks and open spaces for recreation, and they certainly do fit that bill. But moreover, the attraction to our parks and open spaces by those who do not live in our area, when they do come and experience that, they do tend to come back. They also tend to go home and tell their friends, neighbors, and family about what a great experience they had. About 20 years ago, the city of Cottage Grove had an opportunity to just about double its parks and open spaces. And that was done for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was the fact that economic development was one of those things that's very important to rural parts of Lane County, because we had lost the driving force for the economy in much of the rural part of Lane County. And so we recognized there was this great natural resource out there that people would appreciate to come to. Just needed a little bit of oversight and a little bit of guidance to make that happen. The experience in South Lane County, East Lane County, from Oak Ridge to Cottage Grove and all points in between, those parks and open spaces that were developed and those connectable routes, excuse me, that were developed, they brought a vitality economically and a sense of newfound purpose for some of those communities that had kind of lost their way for a while. So when you look at a master plan and the heavy lift and the incredible amount of time and effort it takes to get there, and when you end up with a product at the end that you're very, very proud of, and it's been heavily refined and tuned, and you have partnerships and public buy-in, you cannot go wrong with that. And I just want to thank all of those people who recognize the treasures we have in our community and our counties. And thank you for doing what you do and bringing this to fruition. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I just want to, take a moment to thank everyone that's already been publicly thanked, and maybe to go past that to a couple people that haven't been mentioned. I want to thank Charlie Conrad, who's in the audience, who has been working on this diligently, staffing this for parks over time. And I don't want to forget that land management actually has a hand in this also as it gets adopted into our rural comprehensive plan. So thank you, Amber, for your work on that. And I want to go back and thank some of the staff that maybe got villainized a little bit through this process. Our former parks director, some of our former park staff, they were dealing with a crisis. Remember back to 2013, we were still reeling from the 2008 economic crisis, and the recovery hadn't gotten past Portland. We had lost secure rural school funds. And every kind of revenue that comes into parks, RV fees and car rental tax had dropped. And parks were just, in crisis funding-wise. And they tried, unfortunately, in some not so great ways to resolve that and trying to develop, interesting new revenue streams, which a few folks living around Mount Pisgah remember. And then they also tried to push out a master plan real quick because they thought it was really important to get one adopted so they could start talking about how to fund the master plan. They were reacting to crisis, and maybe not such a good way. Fortunately, our new administrator had the good sense to listen to folks and not try and be reactive to crisis as much, and try and bring in a third party and a lot of public involvement and do something the way it should be done, and try and get there. And this plan is a result of those efforts, and there's a lot of folks that were involved in that. And it's a really good plan. But we're seeing us work this way in lots of places, and we're going to get to some public comment later and some response about homelessness, and we see the county and the city jointly going to a third party, the Technical Advisory Collaborative, known as TAC, to study our homeless system and make recommendations on how to make permanent changes to that. We're getting ready to have a courthouse presentation here, where we brought in outside consultants and looked deliberately at that instead of reactively. So I think we've kind of developed that tradition. It helps build trust in Lane County, and I think the adoption of these plans is finalizing some of that trust. And I really appreciate everyone involved, the expertise they lent, even if it was just to represent, your small piece of being a regular citizen of Lane County. I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this. It's really demonstrates our values here at Lane County, demonstrates our vision and the way we want to continue to work in cooperation and trust and deliberately through a strategic, plan-driven sort of way. And this sets up our strategic plan for parks. So I really appreciate the work done by staff, all the work done by the public, the consultants here, and past staff who tried their best to work on a very difficult problem. And it's passing the master plan doesn't end the problem. I think, Art, you identified, kind of hit the nail on the head. There is an issue with $17 million in unfunded and needed repairs and deferred maintenance out there, competing with everything else in our system. If you were here for public comment, you heard a lot of requests for us to be adding funding into support of our homeless system. So we have lots of demands on our resources. We have to continue to kind of go through that in a deliberative process with public involvement, with a strategic plan and develop the best way to figure out how to do all of these things and balance with each other. So really appreciate it. Really appreciate the work you've done. I do understand the economic side of parks. I spend February and March pestering Eric Peterson every year because I understand what happens when Fern Ridge Reservoir doesn't get filled, and Veneta and Elmira businesses suffer because of that. So about every February I start asking them, so how's the refill going? Because one year they didn't make it, and we sure felt that out in Veneta. And if they don't get, any of the other reservoirs filled that we have campsites on, it definitively impacts those parks and then every business around it. So I truly appreciate that. So thank you for all the work everyone did. I will be voting in support of this adoption, as the many emails I have received have asked me to. Further discussion from the board? Seeing and hearing none, this is a roll call vote.
I'll take the roll.
You'll take the roll, so we'll first do ordinance PA 1364.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Yes.
Commissioner Lykin?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams? Commissioner Farr?
Yes.
Chair Bozovich?
Aye. Ordinance 1364 passes 5-0. Ordinance 1812.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Aye.
Commissioner Lykin?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Commissioner Farr?
Yes.
Chair Bozovich?
Aye. Ordinance 1812 passes 5-0. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you for your support.
Oh, my gosh.
It's hard for me to say that something's a first around here.
Oh, my goodness, that was great. Sounded like my puppy. With that, I'm going to jump back in our agenda to public comment. I understand we had one person that missed getting on the list this morning, so I want to take that person Devin, did you have one more public comment sheet for me? Okay, I'll ask then. So if folks could clear the room, because we really have a very full agenda. So I understand there was one person that did not get a chance to sign up for public comment. Do you want to raise your hand if you're still in the room? If you want to come forward and state your name and where you're from for the record. I'm hoping folks will, folks please?
My name is Larry Gunn.
Larry, can you hold on just a second so we can hear you? Please clear the room or quiet down.
I'm here to
Thanks, Larry. Go ahead.
try and suggest we, as a county, look at a county public bank. After listening to the funding problems here, it seems to me that it would be appropriate for some study in that area. Was David Monk here earlier?
Yes, he was.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, there's a lot of muttering in the room, Mr. Chair.
Well, the purpose of a public bank is to support local businesses, the members of the community. Public banks started in, basically, Benjamin Franklin started the first one. The opportunity to promote the local commerce of the citizens of the county in a way that all the money that's generated from the system comes back to the county. The most successful example of that is Bank of North Dakota, which started in 1919 as a result of the depression that occurred in the latter part of that century. It has supported the banks in the community through this by using the funds that are sitting around that the county collects year after year, gets invested back east by the big banks. They don't pay very much, and the money that's used is used elsewhere in the country. It occurs to me that this time in our country, we are losing control of almost everything we care about. I like the idea of having a bank that supports the county on a local basis, from the seashore to the mountains, would have representatives in all of the communities. That idea of control, I think, is something that we all sense that we have lost. The distributive services of a county bank would tend to bring the community together. I'll leave you with a picture of the number of places in the country. There are about 50 that are currently looking at starting a bank like this. The idea is to house the unhoused, to feed the hungry, improve the school system, and care for the elderly. This project, I think, can be boosted dramatically by people like me, who are just citizens of the county, but believe strongly that we have an opportunity to do something that's only been done one other time in the country since the 1900s. That's when the Bank of North Dakota started. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all, but they weathered the recession better than any place else in the country. They had a surplus. Their unemployment rate was the lowest in the country. So it's an idea that's worth pursuing, and I'm sorry I'm here so late. I have something to hand out to you guys. Who should I give it to?
I want to leave it there for Pat. He'll pass it down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll move on to Commissioners' response for public comment and/or other remonstrance. And I'll remind the Commissioners we still have a lot of business to get through this morning. Any response? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, and I do have a couple of minutes that this will take. You know, last night I sat in this hall as the Eugene City Council had an emergency meeting to discuss properties at and surrounding the Camp 99, which is on county property. I'm not going to talk much about that last night, but the City Council did pass 4 different motions supporting Dawn to Dawn and other programs surrounding our camping efforts on Highway 99, our homelessness efforts. That's just a precursor to what I'm going to say. There was also at the same time a candlelight vigil for Tom Egan, who I served with in the Army. Tom Egan first greeted me in the fall of 1978 with words I'm always going to remember. He called me a crunchy. I'll tell you what that means in a second. First Lieutenant Egan was a cavalry officer. He was assigned to Alpha Company in the 2nd Battalion of the 162nd Infantry Regiment. He was a cavalry officer among crunchies. Crunchies are what cavalry and armor officers call infantrymen. He said, it's kind of rude, but he said that's the sound that infantrymen make when tanks roll over them. I was a 2nd lieutenant. I had a lot to learn. Tom was ready to teach me, and he really did spent a lot of time teaching me. Not only did he teach me, but he also came into contact teaching many other soldiers in his own way. It was his way. Tom had an engaging way of speaking. For instance, in hand grenade class in front of large groups, he'd hold up a pineapple hand grenade. This is Tom Egan from Tom Egan Warming Centers, and he had a pineapple hand grenade. He'd pull the pin out in a room with a bunch of privates and sergeants and 2nd lieutenants, and he'd say, "Without the pin, Mr. Hand Grenade is not your friend." Believe me, people listen to Tom Egan teaching. 30 years later, Tom Egan froze to death, alone and homeless at the north end of Blair Street in Eugene. And through his memory, Tom is still teaching us every single day, not in a way that he or I or any of the other soldiers he endeared himself to would have expected or preferred, but he's still teaching. Back then, there were 4 officers in our unit. 2 of them, Colonel Tony O'Connor, went on to a long career at the Pentagon. General Ray Byrne became the Adjutant General of the Oregon Army National Guard. I went on to a short career in the legislature, and I'm sitting here today after working at Jerry's and Food for Lane County. Tom died, frozen, homeless. So what happens that makes a man in the same group of peers die frozen and homeless on a street, while others in that same group are able to succeed? Sometimes it's just one little nudge along the way. Sometimes it's one little event, one little place for them to sleep the night instead of laying against a fence. On my way into work this morning, I took my normal route to work, and on the way I passed no less than 12 different sanctioned responses to homelessness. I passed the Eugene overnight camping program this one was at Bethesda Lutheran Church, which houses a single camper. Churches around our community house campers. I passed Camp 99, which is a low-barrier temporary camp operated by the county at this point in time, and it is temporary. I passed the St. Vincent de Paul Lindholm Center. I passed Sponsors housing project on Roosevelt and Highway 99. I passed the Roosevelt Rest Stop, which is a tent camping area. Opportunity Village was on my way here. The Veterans Rest Stop was on my way here. This is all on my 4-mile journey into town, 5-mile journey into town. I passed Square One Villages, Emerald Village, Eugene. I passed the Veterans Rest Stop. Veterans Safe Spot, excuse me. I passed Eugene Mission. And then I also passed a wreath at the end of Blair Street, which was laid last night in memory of Tom Egan, who froze at that point, at that spot. And on the way here, I also passed the future home of Homes for Goods Oaks housing project just a block or so from where we're sitting. But even with all of those responses that we have to homelessness, and we have plenty of them, sanctioned by the city, sanctioned by the county, administered by St. Vincent de Paul and others, I still passed a 13th kind of homeless response, unsanctioned camping. In several different spaces on my way down here, there were people who could not find a place to camp, thereby were camping in places that are not legal, and they have stand the chance of being moved along tonight or sometime during the middle of the night. So it underlines the fact, Mr. Mulcahy, that's something that you have paid a great deal of attention to. How do we respond to the need for people to have a safe place to sleep every single night in innovative new ways? We are working on that. I'd like to thank you and your staff for the work that you have done and acquiescing that there's a great deal of work ahead of us as we move forward into the new year to find not just winter response, but year-round response to people who need to have a safe, warm, secure, and sanitary place to sleep. Mr. Chair, thank you for indulging me in that.
Thank you. Further remonstrance from the board or response to public comment? I think there'll probably be a little bit more discussion under board business and future agenda items. So I imagine there'll be some discussion. I know there was a request to provide some direction to the administrator. I will note that our administrator has some broad authority to manage the county. We are a policy-setting board. He is the administrator and has the ability to spend up to $100,000 basically without coming to the board. So the fact that we are taking the shortest recess of any public body for the winter holidays, shorter than the city of Eugene, shorter than most other jurisdictions, there is still an administrator in place that has that kind of authority. And it was pretty obvious how much authority he has because Camp 99 happened without board direction. So for those that were asking for us to give direction and delegation of authority to the administrator, he already has that. And will continue to work on resolving some of these issues. So with that, if there's no further response or remonstrance, I'll move on to emergency business. Any emergency business this morning? No. Then we have the consent calendar, which is items that are routine and we voted on in a single motion without discussion. And no one asked to pull anything from it during adjustments to the agenda, so I will entertain a motion to approve today's consent calendar. Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move approval of December 18th, 2018 consent calendar.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Lyken, seconded by Commissioner Williams to approve the December 18th, 2018 consent calendar. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. So with that, we will move on to county council. There's no exec session today. And if there's no other announcements from county council, we'll move on to county administration. And Mr. Mulcahy, I will leave it to your discretion if you want to move announcements behind some of the courthouse items. Seeing we have folks.
Why don't we, I'm happy to wait on that and we can take up the courthouse items now.
Okay. Then we'll move to item 8B, which is a presentation on the Lane County Courthouse Scoping Study. And we have a whole bunch of people here for that.
We do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to invite Jim Robertson, Todd Orr, and John Bales up here, and I'll introduce our group. They're going to present information to you about the scoping study, and I'm just going to do some introductory comments here first. Do you want to sit here and then, well, however you guys want to handle that is fine. Jim Robertson from Robertson Sherwood Architects, a local architecture firm in Lane County. John Bales from GMB Consulting, who did our conceptual cost estimating, and Todd Orr from DLR Group will walk through the bulk of the presentation. So a few introductory comments, Mr. Chair. We're pleased to present this scoping study to you from Robertson Sherwood Architects and DLR Group. This is intended to create a vision for how the new courthouse can better serve our community for generations to come. And I think it's important to reflect here before we launch into the details of this scoping study to remind ourselves that a courthouse is essential to democracy in Lane County. This is not just a building. This is where people in our community come to seek justice and resolution to conflicts. Conflicts that range from small property disputes to custody battles, or from personal injury cases to murder cases. Even adoptions happen in our Lane County Courthouse. Built in 1959, or opened in 1959, nearly 60 years ago, the current courthouse was intended to serve a smaller community and a vision of justice that no longer represents our community or expectations and our community's expectations for equal access. A new Lane County Courthouse would represent our community's commitment to fair and impartial justice. It would reflect the diversity of our community. It would provide equal access to everyone seeking justice and serve as a place where independent, unbiased justice helps to serve our community for the betterment of all. A central element in Lane County's public safety system is our courthouse. And so we have here this graphic on the screen and the board in front of you. We haven't looked at this for a little bit, but a couple years ago we developed this graphic to demonstrate that as we're talking about individual components of the public safety system and investing in individual components, we have to really be focusing on the entire system. That an investment just in jail beds does not create a safe community. It's a significant component of that. And so I wanted to bring this up to articulate the point that our public safety system, just as a chain is only as strong as its weakest link, our public safety system is only as strong as its weakest link. And the board and our public safety partners have taken great care to make significant investments in targeted strategic areas over the past several years. Our jail levy that has helped to end the cycle, the revolving door at the jail, our stabilizing of having at least 24 hours of patrol, but we know that that is still inadequate. Our investments in supervision and working with the DA's office to add prosecution services so that we can leverage additional funding from the state, our investments in mental health and community-based services. This is a system. And in order for the system to function, all of its parts need to be adequate. And we know, we've known for quite some time that our courthouse is not adequate to meet those needs. So investment in all of these areas: crime prevention, apprehension, diversion through prosecution, sentencing, supervision, and recovery. We're focused on all of that. And the courthouse is really the core element, the foundational element of creating that access to justice. The increased efficiency of a new courthouse will also result in the ability to more effectively process cases, which, as I mentioned, allows us to increase state funding to support prosecution and supervision, further strengthening the public safety system. And finally, the impacts, as you heard from an individual who spoke this morning under public comment, the benefits to our local economy are significant. We can't lose sight of the fact that this is a project of significant magnitude that will provide opportunities for local businesses and workers to contribute and benefit, helping to keep local dollars here in our community. Redeveloping the downtown area and the corridor between Willamette River and Willamette Street. So I'm going to ask Devin to queue up a video. We have a 4-minute video that we've developed, and before we show that, I'm just going to walk through a brief timeline, and then after the video is done, I'm going to turn it over to Jim and Todd to walk through the presentation. As the board knows, this is not the first time we've had this conversation. I'm just going to take you through the past 5 years of work so that we can recall all of the effort that has gone into getting to where we are today. In 2014, the Association of Oregon Counties, in collaboration with the Oregon Judicial Department and the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, developed a task force to evaluate proposals for county courthouse replacements across the state so that the most viable projects could be placed in the Chief Justice's recommended budget on a prioritized basis. So that was the beginning of having a structured process statewide to make sure that the most important projects got in the queue first. In July of 2015, Lane County formally entered the queue of prioritized projects after submitting its application to the Oregon Judicial Department for the Oregon Courthouse Capital Construction Improvement Fund, which is the bonding program that the legislature has made available to support state funding for these projects. Later in 2015, the county formally engaged the National Center for State Courts to undertake a long-term needs assessment. The assessment was completed in May of 2016. And that was really a critical moment where we identified the initial estimates for square footage and needs for a new courthouse. During this 2016 legislative session, the Oregon legislature approved an initial $1.4 million in bond funding authorization for planning the new Lane County Courthouse. During the 2017 legislative session, the Oregon legislature approved a second bond funding authorization of $5 million. So now we're up to $6.4 million. $5 million for pre-construction development. During 2017 and 2018, Lane County collaboratively worked with the City of Eugene to examine downtown development projects through a series of public meetings, studies, and focus groups. The intent was to say, let's really make sure that we identify the proper location in the community for the courthouse and the proper location for other public facilities. That work ultimately concluded with the jointly negotiated purchase and sale agreement to transfer the Lane County's Butterfly Lot property to the City of Eugene and the city's former City Hall block to Lane County to support the development of these critical public facilities. In August of 2018, Lane County engaged Robertson Sherwood Architects of Eugene in conjunction with our courthouse consultant DLR Group, which is a national expert in courthouse development and scoping, to undertake a scoping study to review the National Center for State Courts assessment assumptions that was completed in 2016, and the assumptions and recommendations, and to validate that the former City Hall lot is a viable site for the courthouse and its related facilities. And at the same time, the county engaged with DMB Consulting to develop conceptual cost estimates for the project based upon the scoping study results. So today's item represents the culmination of all of these efforts. I will end by noting that in December, in this month, December of 2018, Oregon's Governor Brown released her recommended budget that mentions Lane County's courthouse project and refers to the Judicial Department, which is a separate branch of government and has its own recommended budget to the legislature, that was developed by the Chief Justice. And the Chief Justice's recommended budget outlines a total statewide of $145.5 million in state funding for courthouse requests. Of that $145 million during the 2019 to 21 biennium, $87.6 million is Lane County's amount that is included in that estimate for our courthouse request. That is on top of the $5 million previously approved by the legislature and the $1.4 million prior to that. So that's the history. Can we roll the video, and then I'll turn it over to Jim and Todd.
The courthouse, as far as a big picture for our community, deals with the heart of every person and their constitutional rights. We handle every case from traffic tickets up to murders. We handle everything involving juvenile court and family law, car accidents, personal injury matters. We're the everything court in Oregon. The space limitations of the courthouse affect the public because it delays things. Right now, the Lane County Courthouse has 15 courtrooms. We process over 33,000 cases in the Lane County Circuit Court every year. It's causing delays and inefficiencies that are costing our taxpayers money every single day. The problem that we have also with space is we don't have any separation.
We don't have space within the courtrooms where attorneys can meet with their clients.
The only thing that the court can really do is take an entire recess, empty the room, and set up a place right there in the courtroom where you can talk to your attorney without anyone there. To do an entire shutdown of a courtroom for somebody to have a 5-minute conversation with their attorney ends up taking more like 40 minutes.
On average, our protective order clinic each year helps anywhere from 2,200 to 2,500 petitioners who are filing for civil orders of protection.
Victim Services Division has on any given Monday 15 people coming in to get restraining orders.
There's not a lot of private places where we can have one-on-one. It's not really ideal.
It's very likely that a victim or a witness standing outside of a courtroom waiting for court proceedings might see the defendant or the inmate being led through the public space to get into the courtroom.
Part of the thing about being a judge is you need to make sure that the information you're getting in a courtroom is true and accurate. And you can't get that if people are afraid to even come into the building.
There's only one elevator available to move inmates.
There are no separate entrances or exits to this building to be able to keep the parties apart during those very volatile times.
This courthouse does not have access for a large portion of our community to participate in all the ways our community needs to participate. If they are in a wheelchair, they have to go outside of the building and come back into the building so that they can avoid the half set of stairs on that first floor landing to get to security. We don't have a juror box in the building that could be easily accessed with, for instance, a walker or a wheelchair or anything of that nature. There are stairs and doorways that are not compliant. Getting around the building for someone with challenges is nearly impossible.
Because of the way the building is designed, we can't create more space. We've done a terrific job of managing within what we have.
We don't know what kind of maintenance problem we're walking into every day in this building, but normally there is something.
We've had a recurring problem where the sewage in the courthouse backs up to the point where raw sewage ends up coming through the ceiling tiles and saturates their office space. Similarly, we've had that happen to our property and evidence room.
Our elevators are so old that when they go down, we've had to shut down the entire elevator for 2 to 3 weeks. When it happens in public elevators, which some days we have come in and both public elevators have been not functioning, then that just shuts down the entire courthouse. And that's happened.
These courtrooms are not designed for the technology that we have today. Every case involves some kind of technology to present it to the jury or to the judge.
We could do so much more to serve the courts in a more efficient manner if we had a more efficient building.
Having more secure areas where we can provide the services that we need to, I think would be huge.
On behalf of Robertson Sherwood Architects and DLR Group, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present the results of the Lane County Courthouse scoping study as summarized in our final report dated December 13th, 2018. For the past 4 months, our team of local architects from Robertson Sherwood and Just Design specialists from DLR Group from Portland and Orlando have worked with key stakeholders representing the courts, courts administration, the district attorney's office, and the sheriff's office to identify and define their specific facility needs projected for the foreseeable future. Our team used this information to prepare an update of the facility program that outlines the space requirements for all of those functions. With the assistance of Cameron McCarthy Landscape Architects, we then used the mathematical information from that program to develop conceptual stacking diagrams on the proposed site of the former City Hall. In a separate effort, our report was then used by John Bales from JMB Consulting Group to prepare an independent estimate of the probable construction costs. Now, those probable construction costs can then be added to the non-construction related project costs in order to develop a final project budget. I'd like now to ask Todd Orr from DLR, who was our lead justice planner, to present an overview of our report and the recommendations contained in the report, and then we'll be open to any questions that you might have. Todd?
Good morning, Commissioner Bocevich and fellow commissioners. Honored to be here today on behalf of the consultant team to speak to you about the scoping study that we have completed for the Lane County Courthouse. The video that you just saw in this slide here sort of shines a light both on the problems that we're looking to solve with this new courts facility, and also with the scoping study shining a light on the path forward and how we can address those in a new facility and much needed infrastructure here for Lane County. Some of the things that you saw in the video previously is a need for safety and security of individuals coming to seek justice at the facility. Also, the ability to dispense justice in a safe and efficient manner. Looking at all the spaces that are required by the staff and users of this facility, making sure those are right-sized and are representing modern courthouse planning trends and standards moving forward that have been adopted by the county. Also, the notion of a welcoming and customer-oriented facility. As the video so eloquently put, and Steve has also mentioned, that the court facility is here to serve the citizens of Lane County, and the ability to have access to those services is of high importance. As you look into some of the details that are outlined in the scoping document, we are looking to develop a program and a space needs, which is essentially a mathematical allocation of area, allowing staff and people to do their job as that's required within their individual departments. Here outlined, you'll see the various components that make up the program document. These are the sort of the high-level pieces and parts that are referenced in the document and also be utilized in future space planning that you'll see later on in the presentation. Some of the details that can be found within these larger headings, the notion of the public facilities and building support, things of that component are essentially your building entrance and how people arrive at the building, how they come through security, and eventually find their way to the services provided within the building. Courtrooms and chambers are fairly obvious at that component, but some of the subcomponents within the courtrooms and chambers element are the dispensement of jury deliberation spaces and other support spaces and conferencing spaces, which the video outlines that do not exist in the facility today. There are no private areas for attorneys to meet with their clients before or during intermission of courtroom settings. That is allocated within that section of the program. Court administration is, in some ways, the face of the courthouse. It has the ability to greet the public. It is representative of all the public clerk counters where people come to get business at the courthouse. That's also where jury services is located. It was within that program component. And district attorney, within their office space and their support areas, has also a grand jury space, which currently exists in the building today, but is quite substandard from what is required to separate parties that are coming to provide testimony during grand jury. The sheriff component, we have both their main office facility, which is in the existing building today, and we also have the transport component, which is the receiving of inmates from the jail and how those individuals get processed and put into the court facility today. That is one of the biggest sort of shortcomings of the facility today, and the program and the scoping document highlights how that is going to be solved throughout the pages that are in that document. Probation and parole, and also the Oregon Public Defense Services Commission have been added to the program to provide the added level of service to the community and citizens of Lane County. The process that we went through was several months, and it included individual stakeholder workshops, understanding the individual needs of the departments and the program elements that are provided within the scoping study. We need to understand the staffing requirements that are required to do the job in the court building. Also, how, moving forward, that we look at arranging those pieces and parts within the department and within the overall building footprint so those functions are easily accessible by the public, and also provide a level of efficiency within the department so the resources and the support areas that are needed by staff are provided in an efficient manner. We also did individual facility tours to have a better understanding of those operations so that we went into this process with eyes wide open, understanding, absorbing all that information that we heard, and also providing our experience and knowing how court facilities are developed and providing that layer of expertise and information back to the stakeholder team. And in conclusion, the process also included these stakeholder team meetings, which were sort of all-encompassing meetings that sort of got out of the individual day-to-day departmental operations of individual stakeholders, but looked at a high-level approach to how the site would be utilized and how the building would ultimately be organized to support the needs of the departments and the citizens of Lane County. Some of the key findings and observations that we uncovered during our time here on site and working with the stakeholder groups. The video outlines this. We'll talk about this in great detail throughout the next couple slides. The understanding of providing what a courthouse, modern courthouse needs is that separation of public, private, and secure circulation movement for all those different parties. That is a key deficiency in the building today and one that will absolutely be solved moving forward with a new courthouse for Lane County. That was outlined in the video as well, the need for additional courtroom space. Today in the facility, there are 15 courtrooms. All those courtrooms are a variety of shapes and sizes, and some serving the court better than others. We have looked to universalize the courtroom module to provide a lot of flexibility and the ability for future technologies in the future in those courtroom settings. We're projecting out to 18 courtrooms in total for the scope of this project. So as we mentioned, there's 15 today. The 16th position is essentially on its way, so it provides a flexibility with 2 additional courtroom spaces for the future. Jury services, as I mentioned, is within the court administration program component. That exists today in the facility, but some of the amenities that are required for jury services are absent today, and those are being provided in the program document. Also, the location of that facility is currently outside of the secure boundary of the courthouse. So those citizens coming to serve jury duty, while they can come directly to the jury assembly space, they have to then proceed through security once they are called to the courtroom, slowing down the efficiency and the operations of the court. That function will be co-located behind security in the new courthouse, providing that operational efficiency and that on-time delivery of jurors to the courtroom setting. Dispute and mediation spaces currently do not exist in the building, and they also did not exist in the original program that we were looking as a foundation for. And conversations with key stakeholders and our understanding of current planning trends in courthouse facilities, providing spaces that provide the avenue for other means of dispute resolution outside of the courtroom environment is imperative in the new court facility, and those spaces have been provided and accounted for in the program. 2 key components that are in your facility today that are important to be maintained within the court facility are both the sheriff's component and the component for the district attorney. The ability to provide efficient operations by having the co-location of those functions within the facility is important to make efficient use of staff, efficient use of space, and efficient use of service to the citizens of Lane County. And in conclusion, we also have the program element of the Office of the Public Defense Services, currently not in the facility today, but is a state agency that provides services to citizens seeking justice within the court facility. The image in the upper left is a photograph or an image taken from the video, and it's highlighting that movement of inmates through the public circulation corridor. The diagram, the plan diagram that's paired with it on the right, is essentially the basic building block of a modern court facility and how we provide that secure area between a pair of courtrooms that eliminates the ability for that transportation or that movement to happen ever in the public circulation corridor, and also eliminates that from happening behind the scenes in the private areas as well, which currently exists in the facility. So what you see on the screen is 2 courtroom footprints, the universal courtroom, one on the right and one on the left, and in between those pairs of courtrooms is the red area, which is our holding area that is co-located between pairs of courtrooms on all the court floors. Inmate delivery occurs from the lower level and arrives via elevator at this red area between pairs of courtrooms, where on the court floors we have provided areas for holding and staging of individuals waiting to proceed into the courtroom in a safe and secure manner. And in addition, we have a private non-contact visitation room that allows during court recess, before or after court, for attorneys to meet with their clients to speed up the processing and efficiency of a court case on the court floor. In addition, we have attorney-client conference room spaces out front of the courtrooms that are currently not present in the building today that provide other means of private conversation for attorneys interacting with their clients. Within the courtroom environment itself, I mentioned earlier that we're looking to develop in the program what we call a universal courtroom type. The area allocation assigned to this universal courtroom is an industry standard. It is not asking a lot. It is a basic building block for what we see in the courtroom today. It provides modest seating in the gallery for spectators. It provides all the necessary separation of attorney tables from the jury box, and elevated ADA accessible positions to all raised positions in the courtroom for public and staff access. That includes the jury box, the witness box, the judge's position, and the JA and the clerk. That is something that is not currently present in the courthouse facility today, and that this courtroom module will address. One of the questions we had received earlier was how to provide some additional flexibility to that courtroom environment in the case that not in all cases that juries are required. We'll mention throughout the process today that this is not a design. While we are very familiar with courthouse planning and putting courthouses together, we have done enough work here to shed some light on the realities of a court facility, both in its planning and in its operation, and how it works on your site in downtown. So the opportunity in the future that if the jury box were to be removed from the courtroom setting, so in the well, you'll see the red dotted line where the jury box was originally located, provides additional flexibility for additional tables for different case types. A lot of cases today we're seeing, and it's also present here in Lane County, the need for specialty courts, which is your veterans court, your drug court, your mental health court. Those are the things that are very service oriented, and it's not about incarceration, it's about providing wellness and improvement of quality of life for those individuals. So those are not jury driven, but they are support agency driven, and hence the need for additional table space within the courtroom setting. Sort of in summary of the program analysis, all the different pieces and parts that we mentioned earlier that make up the program, the mathematical analysis that we arrived at the end of this process was a grand total of a building gross area of 297,000 square feet, 297,600 square feet is what represents the building area that was required today to meet the needs outlined in the program based on our meetings. One of the key components of the scoping study is actually applying this program and these pieces and parts that make up the departments that operate the court system and looking at the site downtown. In previous studies, there's been the mathematical analysis and other studies looking at the site independently. But the scoping study brings those two concepts together, looking at both program and area and the realities of the downtown site. So for those who may or not be familiar with the site that we're looking at, it is the former Eugene City Hall site, which is just east of the building we sit in here today, bounded on the north by 7th Avenue, bounded on the south by 8th Avenue, on the west, Pearl Street, and on the east, High. So as we started to look in more detail as what a new court facility would mean on the Eugene City Hall site, we looked at two elements, site considerations and the building considerations. As it related to the site pieces specifically, understanding downtown Eugene and understanding how development will occur here in the future, being sensitive to where the primary streets are and access to the site. A courthouse, while we have separate circulation systems, all that sets up outside of the building footprint. So setting those foundational elements in place from the site moving into the building are very important. So we looked at 8th Avenue and the intersection of 8th Avenue and Pearl as primary street access. Public parking, looking at opportunities below the building and on grade to provide flexibility in the future. Looking at the Great Streets concept, being very familiar and understanding where the future of downtown is headed, and providing the opportunity in all cases, both in our planning and in the site planning, of looking at how the building could expand in the future, providing an avenue forward for long-term growth and expansion. As it relates to the building considerations, I know Commissioner Bushevich has been part of this process, and we've looked at a lot of different opportunities. What shows up in the report is a path forward that checks a lot of boxes and things that we're trying to solve and looking to solve in a new courthouse. But there was a lot of other work that was done, that was behind, that looked at other options and understanding that there are different ways to put this building together, and knowing that there's still ways to put this building together, because there's another phase that comes after the scoping study where you hire a design consultant to look at the final solution. But we wanted to provide enough due diligence to provide an excellent path forward and understanding both with John's cost model, the program, and understanding how the pieces and parts could go together, that we're providing a very thoughtful and intelligent way of looking at the future of the courthouse building. So jumping into the actual proposed building organization and massing. Here you see it's a 7-story building to the south facing towards 8th Avenue. On the west side with Pearl Street, just across the street from the Public Services building where we're at today. And a very simple color codified diagram. Areas in blue identify any pieces and parts that are related to the court facility. The pieces in the color in the red represents the functions that are related to the sheriff component. One of the things that was very important in the development of how the building would go together is understanding that there's entrances to the courthouse facility and a separate entrance to the sheriff facility. In some ways, from a presentation to the public, there are 2 separate entrances and 2 separate facilities, but behind the scenes, the inner workings and the collaboration between across departments and agencies, that would all happen internal to the planning diagram. Here is a site analysis diagram showing that 3-dimensional mass in 2 dimensions on the property today. Again, facing to the south, the yellow arrow representing the entrance to the new court facility. The arrow along Pearl Street showing the entrance to the sheriff facility. To the northeast quadrant of the site is opportunity for surface parking. In the red area and the blue area representing the major components of the court facility and/or the sheriff facility. The dotted box up in the upper right-hand corner of the site plan shows that by placing the building in this configuration allows for either future parking, structured parking in the future, it could be future building area in the future, to allow this site to be very flexible and serve the county for many, many years. So going quickly, floor by floor of the plan areas and the organization of the building. Here we're seeing the first floor. So to the south, anything that's shown in yellow is our public circulation, understanding how individuals will come into the facility and access functions within the court's facility and the sheriff facility. On the first floor, the south is 8th Avenue, to the north is 7th Avenue. So in the main body of the building, we have court administration functions, parole and probation, and the Office of the Public Defense Services, all high-volume functions, all functions that should be on the ground floor and provide that ease of access to the public coming to the facility. The sheriff and the leg to the north with a separate entrance and providing floor area for the sheriff in that particular location. The diagram in the upper right-hand portion shows that 3-dimensional massing and where those departments and where we're looking at in the individual floor-by-floor area of the building. Moving up into the facility to the second floor, 2 main components that are on the second floor of the building. In the red is the balance of the sheriff facility, sheriff's functions, and in the orange is the entire footprint of the district attorney. Levels 3 through 6 are similar floors. They are essentially a 4 courtroom per floor court plan, which has 4 courtrooms and the necessary support spaces behind the courtrooms of jury deliberation spaces, judicial chambers, and mediation spaces along the back corridor. On the front of the courtrooms, we have all the conference room spaces, and in the yellow area is breakout spaces for private meetings and seating and waiting for individuals going into the courtrooms. On the upper floor of the building is a sort of a hybrid floor. In this case, it's the 7th floor, where we have the balance of the 18 courtrooms. It's 2 courtrooms on this floor, and the balance of the floor for additional area for court administration space in the blue. Jumping down quickly to the lower level. The lower level essentially is the opportunity for secure parking in the facility. That's also where we have central holding and the main inmate delivery functions of the facility going down to the lower level of the building. We're sort of pairing this diagram with an overall building section. If you look into the upper left-hand side of the slide, where you see the three-dimensional mass, we're essentially taking that mass in the section and cutting it in half, almost like cutting into an orange or an apple and looking what's inside. And here you see the individual floor-by-floor organization of the facility. And it shows in section at the lower level how you go down below the building and where you'd have access to the secure parking areas and access to central holding. Sort of in conclusion of the scoping study and looking at how the building would deploy itself on the site and provide a little bit more insight to how the building would be resolved and understanding and providing some information that would work with John's estimating services, we would around the facility and provide a little bit of input on the different elevations as it relates to solar orientation, the programmatic functions and security that happen behind those elevations of the building, to understand the level of windows and glazing versus solid materials. So that way, it's not just a shot in the dark. We actually provide a little bit of insight to how the elevations would be articulated in relation to sort of solid to void, if you will, and provided that additional background into John's thinking on the estimate.
Okay. So again, I'm John Bales. I'm with J&B Consulting. I've not been before you, so a little bit of background about myself. 30 years of plus construction and design career path, primarily focused in Oregon and Washington, but also working in Alaska and in Idaho. A lot of our work is focused on public clients such as yourself. We have recently completed projects for King County Courts, their juvenile justice facility, and courthouse, working with Snohomish County Courthouse. They are actually in construction as well. Multnomah County Courthouse, which is in construction as well, and we are currently planning your courthouse, Lynn County Courthouse, and Clackamas County Courthouse, and also work with other city agencies on their municipal court systems. We also work in the police and public safety arena, so we're familiar also with sheriff operations, police facilities, and that sort of thing. So we were tasked by the county. We are contracted directly with the county in this design study. Our purpose was to validate where we are in terms of cost on the project. We spent, as Steve mentioned, a number of years going through studies to get to certain points in time. Now we're ready at this point. We're not looking at other projects to develop costs. We're looking at your project to develop costs. So for us, what is important to develop a cost is to develop an initial baseline cost for the construction of the project. So there are two things that drive costs for a courthouse or for any project at this stage. Part of it is going to be the form of the project, which effectively is that purple 3D diagram. I call that the form. That informs the shell costs of the building, which will be your structural elements, your cladding elements, which Todd referred to as far as we were doing some preliminary studies for daylighting and solar orientation, as well as, your envelope costs, how much of it is going to be roof and that sort of thing. So that particular diagram allows us to hone in on not what other buildings cost and using it as a benchmark, but to say, if we test fit this particular building to this site, which is what the task was, we can articulate probable costs for structural systems, for cladding systems, for roofing systems, and that sort of thing, just based on that massing study. One of the early slides that Todd showed was the program, and it was basically a spreadsheet that tallied different components in the building. It was courts, it was sheriff, it was DA, that sort of thing, and it totaled roughly 297,600 square feet. So with that, we use that information to actually drive the cost of what we would call the interiors element of that. So we know what the box cost is effectively by that 3D diagram. The cost of the interiors is developed literally by the program based on our experience and all the other courts that we've worked on. And we've also looked at the fact that we're building in Lane County, and there are some obvious differences there. For instance, if you benchmark Multnomah County, you're not going to build that county courthouse in Lane County. So that's something that we took very much to heart. It was noted that we are not repeating some of those standards, if you will. So with that, we can then drive the interior costs of the building based on, we know how much parking there is, we know how much sheriff there is, we know how much courtroom information there is, and from that, we can get to a number that develops a building cost number. It captures effectively all of what I call the direct cost of the work, which is all the subcontractor work. It captures the general contractor's overhead and fees. It also captures a forecast for escalation based on this current schedule for the project. So with that number effectively would be, if you were to sign a contractor up today, that would be their contract amount. We also we actually had some help with the landscape architect actually to develop some preliminary site plans that we were actually able to look at cost based on specific areas. It's not just a generic application of a cost per square foot. It's actually specific to this project, to this site, and to this study. So once we've established that baseline construction number, that number then drives the soft cost side of things. So there's more to it, obviously, than just the sticks and bricks cost. We've got what's commonly referred to as a soft cost or associated indirect costs for the project. And these typically will be your design fees, your staffing for the project, permit fees, all of those associated indirect costs are not captured in the construction number. We actually have taken the time to go through each of those lines and apply the appropriate rates for the project. And ultimately what that does is it's driven on a percent basis for the most part, except for furniture, which is driven on a square foot basis by program type. But that ultimately gives you a bottom line that ultimately you can take to the bank in theory to get the project executed. Trying to think. So I guess big picture, that's how we get to where we are today, ultimately, working with the DLR and Jim's group as well as the landscape group to advance your project to what we know today, which is a more scientific approach to where you were several years ago. Are there any questions relative to that, the process that we've taken to get to numbers?
Mr. Chair, I think what we were thinking we'd do is we have a slide that will provide the estimated cost and revenue for the project that John can walk through, and Christine Moody and Robert Tinto can discuss, and Alex Kyler. But this might be a good time to sort of, if you have questions or comments about the scoping study itself before we get into the cost estimating piece, this would be a good time to take those.
Excellent. Commissioner Sorensen.
When we last got together, I asked a series of questions. I wonder if you had answers to those questions. Like the trend in the number of filings. That was one of my questions, because it relates specifically to the diagram you put up that showed that maybe one courtroom would be flexible in the way it was structured, because certain courts don't have juries and they have lots of need of people to be in that courtroom because it's a veterans court or a drug court or something else. And I asked questions about the number of jury trial cases and the trend in jury trial cases. And I guess another question that arises for me today is, if we have 15 courtrooms now and we're planning for 18 courtrooms, are we planning for enough courtrooms? So on the one hand, maybe we have too many courtrooms configured the way you have them. And on the other hand, if we're building a building that already has 15, or we're building a building that has 18, are we building it big enough for the number of courtrooms, jury courtrooms? So I guess the answer is we don't have written answers to those questions.
Not at this time.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, I'd say the court administrator is here and can respond to some of that information, and then you might be able to take on, just in terms of the future projections and estimating based on the scoping.
And I guess the scoping component of this is, we had a lot more jury trials 30 years ago. Now we have a lot more mediations. 30 years ago, we didn't have any veterans court. We didn't have any courts like that. Now we have lots of those kinds of specialty courts. And so I'm asking a scoping question in terms of, well, what's the future? Maybe we won't have any courts. Maybe everybody's going to just get along in 50 years. I'm sure the judge would love this. And we won't need any courts. But you know what I'm saying? I got to have a bigger
longer-term perspective, okay? And to me, building a courthouse with 18 courtrooms when we already have a courthouse that's already jam-packed with 15 courtrooms seems like it's not big enough.
Well, Commissioner, thank you. If I may, I can respond to some of your questions. Lane County is unusual a little bit in terms of case filing trends. What we're seeing in a study that I looked at going back to case filings in 1997 is where in other judicial districts, even in Oregon, the case filings have dropped off significantly. Lane County has tended to stay fairly level. We're currently looking at over 33,000 cases per year, and that has been the trend, you know, with your scatter plot over the last many years. In terms of jury trials, we see a similar trend in Lane County where in other districts, sometimes jury trials are dropping off, but that's not necessarily true here in Lane County. And so much of that is driven by our system as well. When our system doesn't have capacity for the case types that need to go through it, for instance, if it's a criminal case type, then a little bit of that is driven in the different judicial districts by what their system is capacity for filing. So there's some of that. But broader than that, when you asked about the makeup of the courtrooms themselves, every day those jury boxes or that space is used for the management of the courtroom. So for example, perhaps there's not a jury trial that day, but perhaps someone needs to be taken into custody on a warrant or something. The judges use those spaces every day to help manage the people in the courtroom appropriately. Sometimes that means asking someone to sit and wait in that space or move to that space for a variety of different reasons and different case types. And the judge speaks to that much better than I do as well. So did you have other questions? Am I missing one?
I was just interested in maybe this could be something we could take up the next time we have one of these discussions, but the actual number of cases where there's jury trial cases, number of jury trials, and also arising from today's discussion of, and I guess this isn't final, but 18 courtrooms as opposed to 15. On the one hand, I'm asking questions that are specific to statistics about the number of jury trials. And on the other hand, I'm concerned that the number of jury trials that we would have the capability to do in a courtroom setting with only 3 more courtrooms. We're trying to build this building not to satisfy a 2-year need.
Right.
So maybe if we were building it for 2 years, we'd need 18 courtrooms. Maybe if we need it for 10 years, maybe we need 19 courtrooms. So why 18? So if you could help me with.
I can address that briefly.
Yeah.
When the National Center we first started working with them, they looked at everything from case filing trends to jury trial trends to population trends for Lane County as well, and arrived at a range of the number of courtrooms that would be needed. And they looked at 40 years out from 2015 when we started that study. That's how we get to 2055. And they came up with a range based on all of those analytical factors that was between 16 and 18 courtrooms for a new building. And they also look at things nationally, like you talk about with the filing trends and what's going on in the country. So, but more recently with this scoping study, we went to the higher end of that range because we know more now than we did 2 years ago, 3 years ago, so.
Yeah, I noticed that the Portland State University Center for Population Research Center has a Oregon population forecast program that they put together long-term projections for Oregon communities, and Lane County is way up in their projections. Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, and pardon my hoarseness. Pardon in advance if I need to move away from the mic for a second. But you know, I don't want to be guilty of coming in with late questions, accusing you of not doing things that you really have done. Because I've watched the diligence that's gone into the processing and the planning for the courthouse. So I'm not going to go into details. I'm going to be a little bit more emotional about it at this point in time in two ways. One is I spend time over there. Earlier this year, I was a juror on a trial. Against all odds, I was picked as a juror, and I spent a number of days both inside a courtroom and shuttling back and forth between the closet that's called a jury room. And, you know, clearly, the things that you're pointing out are things that you have addressed, we have addressed, and we all know the deficiencies of this particular courthouse. As far as the number of courtrooms, as far as the style of the courtrooms, I trust the work that you've done. And I stood outside the Multnomah County Courthouse 4 weeks ago. Oh my gosh, that is an amazing, I've got a picture of it right here. It's an amazing structure. So I'm confident that the folks, Mr. Mokrajewski, that we have working on this project are competent. And I'm confident that the research that you're doing is well-founded, well-based in history, in experience, and also in the projected needs, Ms. Rambo, for Lane County that you're stating. So I'm not going to go into too much more detail there. Will once again go into the emotional side of it. I spend quite a bit of time in the alternate courtrooms, in what has been Alyssa Rook-Lay's courtrooms for some of the alternate graduations and court hearings. And, you know, the jury box is used. As Ms. Rambo said, I sit in that jury box quite often, not as a juror as well. So once again, I'm confident in the work that you're doing, but my second emotional plea is that we need a courthouse. We know we do, and in this room, as we watch the video, we all know that we need a courthouse. It's up to us as a Board of County Commissioners to make certain that we can accurately recite a narrative and paint a picture to the general public as to how everybody needs this courthouse. It's not just when you are in a jury. It's not just when you're on trial. It's not just when you want to stand on the court steps proclaiming your First Amendment rights. You know, everybody in the county needs a courthouse for a lot of different reasons, and for us to be able to articulate those reasons in terms that people understand is going to be very, very important for us from this point forward. The study that's sitting up on my desk, it's about this thick that I was presented and I've gone through at length, is wonderful, and it gives me a lot of personal insights as to how I can talk to the general public about the need for this courthouse. And that is going to be mainly what I view as my role as we go forward. Your role is providing us with the details and providing us with the analysis and also with the cost effectiveness and cost efficiencies and cost estimates. My role is making certain that people understand, as we clearly are privy to, understands the need for the courthouse as we move forward. So thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Mokrajewski. I'll direct my thanks to you because it goes to everybody involved in this, including Commissioner Bozievich, who has been, for the most part, the lead commissioner as we've worked on this for the last few years. Thank you for the work you've done and help me articulate the need that you're presenting so admirably in the presentation this morning. Thank you very much.
Further questions? So I, really want to commend the study and the work that you've done. And I'm going to step back further than 2014 a little bit. In fact, I'm going to get way back here. Why do we form governments? We form governments to protect our rights and our property from force and fraud, and to provide a mechanism to enforce contracts between private parties. The key component to that piece of government is our judicial system and the ability to equally apply law. That's how important this courthouse is. It is that place where we enforce contracts, where we adjudicate whether somebody's used force or fraud to infringe on somebody's rights or take property. What a critical piece of government function. With that, we've been working on this courthouse long before 2014. We did a courthouse replacement study even before I was on this board. And part of that study came to the conclusion that we couldn't reuse the current courthouse. There was no way to refurbish it while keeping the courts functioning, not to mention the fact it's not seismically sound, which wasn't mentioned in anything we've come across here. But we understood the need, that there was going to be a need to replace this court, but we just had no capital facilities really to do it. And as we, came past the recession and all that, there became an opportunity that the state provided us to actually match funds, because there was a deal cut a while back, long before I was commissioner, that counties would provide the facilities for the courts, the states would fund their operations. So it is actually one of the few things counties are mandated to do, is to supply a court facility. We're also mandated to provide a jail. So one of our clear responsibilities by statute is to provide this court facility. We have an incredible opportunity, though, that the state, passed this bonding measure, and I can't remember what the initials for OCCIF or whatever, I don't even know if I get enough C's in there, are for, but it's basically the state is going to match up to 50% of eligible parts of the building with their bonding authority, which is going to relieve Lane County of a significant portion of the cost and be borne by the entire state, because the state legislature saw that counties were struggling with providing this critical piece of government that supplies justice for our citizens. So I really look at, this courthouse was built and opened in 1959. We had a population of about 160,000 at that time. We currently are at 370,000, a caseload of 33,000. We've hired national experts to study those trends and project what our needs are, square footage wise. They've refined that with DLR Group. I'm not going to question those experts. And those experts got the input of local stakeholders. Sounds kind of familiar. We hired a national expert for our Parks Master Plan, got the input of local stakeholders, and it resulted in an excellent master plan that we just adopted on a unanimous vote with cheers from the stakeholders in the crowd. We're working under that same sort of model here, where we brought in the national experts. And frankly, I have more concerns over underbuilding this with 18 courtrooms than I have in overbuilding. And if it means that we get use past 2055, then we'll look prescient in having built enough capacity to have a facility that's going to last more than 40 years. I'm hoping as we invest in a 297,000 square foot building that it's going to be a 100-year facility, because that's really what you build for when you build this kind of building. And we'll probably be looking, along with the state, bonding this over a much shorter period. And financing this like you'd finance a house. Houses last a lot more than 30 years, but you take out a 30-year mortgage. So you really want it to have that lifespan. So whether we have 18 courtrooms and we might have been able to get away with 16 or 17, I think I'd rather have that 18th courtroom for that extra 20 or 30 years of use. So, and I won't get into the issues with our current courthouse. We've made a lot of those public. But as things change, in my involvement in the AOC task force and looking statewide at the issues of courthouses, getting to hear the statewide issue with that, my involvement with the Public Safety Coordinating Council and sitting on the Justice Reinvestment Grant Review Committee at the state level, I also understand the changes in our judicial system. Our commitments to restorative justice are changing the needs in our courthouses. And that's really, 1959, we had no concept of drug court. We had no concept of how many cases get settled through mediation with multiple parties and needing multiple rooms. So I really appreciate the work you've done. I have one quick question, though, just on the cost and on the form of the building. We're looking at doing underbuilding parking, for secure parking. Of course, when you start going underneath the building, it's expensive. But I understand at this particular site, we may have to excavate anyway. So could you kind of address the cost of going under building for parking versus the need to excavate to remove old foundations and all on this site anyway? Because this gets to how this cost estimate is actually site-specific versus generalized.
Certainly. So To answer your question, below-grade parking is typically more expensive than surface parking, which is, I think, really what you're alluding to. Surface parking is the asphalt that we see outside. So building a basement, if you will, typically is more expensive than that scenario. In this case, you do have a pit out there already, and there will be some excavation already required. So you're already paying for that sort of thing. In this case, if you just built on grade, you would ultimately have to pay money to bring in fill, to bring it up to the appropriate level. So ultimately, I think that you are paying a little bit of a premium for a below-grade solution, but it is not, it's not an extreme situation where you're benefiting from the existing condition, is what I would say. I don't have an answer in terms of dollars what that is, but there is a cost for building below grade.
And I'd just add that in terms of planning for the size building on that particular site, that the foundation systems are going to want to go down that far anyway. So we're going to be building structure, or you would be building structure down. And so in some ways, you're getting a benefit from that because the structure's already down there. You're going to want to place this on the Eugene Formation, which is sort of bedrock that underlines the downtown area. And that would give you your best support for the structure, and it would be a means for you to be able to get that, the benefit of that basement. And one of the benefits from an architectural standpoint is some of those functions that are destined to be down there, like secure parking for the justices and so forth, and secure transport of inmates coming to and from the facility, are things that are sort of wasteful to put those at ground level because we're trying to put as much public service at that ground level space as possible.
Thank you. Commissioner Sorensen.
I just wanted to say that it is hard to imagine what is a more important function for a county than, under the long history of the relationship between the state and counties, to provide courthouses. It's really essential that we do a good job with this. And I'm interested in a little bit more about the sharing of costs. My understanding is that there's $80-some million that is proposed by the Chief Justice and the Governor to be allocated, if the legislature approves it, to this project. And we don't know what the total cost of the project is, but we do know that they're willing, at least the Governor and Chief Justice are recommending, that $86 million be allocated in state funding for this. Are we kind of going on a 50-50 basis here, that it's going to be about half local and half state, or because of the way the state funds can only be used for the state components, it'll be more like a 55-45? Or, Mr. Mulkreis, could you talk about that? Because I had a conversation with a neighbor of mine, and I hope that I can relate it after you answer my question.
Happy to hear that. That's a great segue, Commissioner. And so we want to get to that answer. I want to, that's the next slide that we want to share with you. John will walk through the expenses, and then we'll walk through the revenue and answer that question specifically. If there are no other questions for Jim or Todd, Mr.
I'll just say that he said, what are you working on nowadays? As I said, well, I met with the presiding judge, and she gave me lots of info on what's going on with the courts, and I had my own experience here and the board when we had our previous briefing. And I said, well, I'm working on this courthouse, and I originally thought it was more or less half local, Lane County money, and half state. Since further educated about that, and he says, well, I've been to that courthouse a bunch of times as a juror, and also he was a crime victim, and you really should do something about this. You really should do something about this. As well, it's expensive. I don't know how much it's going to be, but to give you an idea, some ideas, $86 million is what the state is putting up for this. I don't know how much will be local, but it'll be a lot. And he says, well, I just don't think people are going to pay $86 million. And I said, what if what if we offered to sell, if you were offered to buy a house and you only had to pay for half of the house? Would you consider buying a house? He said, yeah, I would consider buying a house if someone else paid half of the house. I said, well, that's what we're trying to put together here. So
You've hit on a number of key points, and I'd like to jump into that piece of the conversation.
I just want to make sure we get one number out there correctly. The state contribution proposed at this time is $93 million.
Yeah.
Don't forget the $6.4 million they've already committed. So, and the way that will roll out is they'll be reimbursing through their bonds. So it's an interesting process. They're not, so, but that's why they can approve the bonding ahead of time, because unless we construct, they don't issue.
So we're good there. I'd like to invite Christine and Robert up here and Alex to the podium, if that's all right. And then do we have the next slide? You're going to pull that up. Robert, come over. So John's going to walk through the expense side with you first and give you sort of the major categories of expenses and dollar amounts attributed to those. These are estimated based on the process that he talked about. And then Alex will touch on the state, the revenue side on the state portion, and Christine and Robert will touch on the local portion. So we will get Commissioner Sorensen to all of your good questions.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. So the first order, there's only going to be a few bullet points. We try to capture these into major categories in terms of looking at the expenditures that you.
John, if you don't mind, kind of aim the mic a little bit more towards your mouth or something there. Thanks.
So ultimately, there are going to be just a few high-level bullet points that we're going to speak to in terms of the expenditures. I touched a little earlier about the construction versus the associated costs. One of the things I didn't touch on was the acquisition cost of the land, obviously. So that is going to be part of the total cost. This is an assessment, an appraisal actually that was done recently for the county. So this is very current information, and it will be kind of a part of the total for the expenditure. The next item is the construction, and this is the construction number. Again, this would be as if you were to buy the contract today from a general contractor. This would be the amount that you would sign. It effectively is all the sticks and bricks, the subcontractor costs, the overhead expenses that relate to the general contractor, their fees, their bonds. It includes a forecast for escalation based on the study as well. So this assumes a project delivery that is several years out. So this particular construction number, captures that forecast for escalation. This is the associated project cost. This is what I touched on a little bit earlier about a soft cost or an indirect cost number. It effectively is everything from the design fees, county administration costs, permit fees. There's an allowance for art at 1%. Basically, all the soft costs that aren't captured in the construction number are in these numbers. There's quite a few line items that go into this, but it's effectively, this is what goes back to that percent-driven number that I touched on a little bit earlier. Again, there's state treasurer expense in these numbers, anything that's not directly related to the building itself. And so ultimately, those are the three categories that we've captured in the expenditure side.
Great. Commissioners, Alex Kyler, Intergovernmental Relations Manager, and both Administrator Mokrajski and Chair Bozovich touched on the series of state funding opportunities that we've accessed and received. In 2016, during the special session, we were awarded the $1.4 million in bonding authority. Then last session, 2017, we were authorized for an additional $5 million. And then this coming session, the Chief Justice's budget has the $87.6 million. So the total number is actually $94 million in state resources that we ultimately hope to have. And Commissioner Sorensen, to answer your question, there is a piece of legislation that goes along with each bond issuance. So it becomes almost like a budget bill. It's unique to that bond issuance. And that legislation outlines what the state will pay for and how it will pay for up to 50% of the courthouse if a project is co-located with a state office. Now, there's a negotiation, frankly, that happens whereby there's an agreement that, in fact, you're going to take up that agreement later today between the state and the county with respect to the funding. And generally, the statute outlines what that agreement shall include. So they typically think about the court operations as being the 50%. The DA is not included. The sheriff's office is not included in our case. What we are trying to include with legislation that we have, I don't know the bill number yet, but we did get signatures for it the other day, was to include the footprint of the law library. That would be sort of a non-traditional expense that we're trying to include in our facility. And this bond issuance that's coming, this piece of legislation we're working on it very closely with Clackamas County, as they're also in the queue. Their request is at $31.5 million. They'll come back in 2021 for another request as they're spreading their costs across 2 biennia, just as we've spread our costs across 3. We're very much like the Multnomah County courthouse model in that regard. And in fact, our legislation that we're proposing is almost identical to what Multnomah County got for their bond issuance.
Is the meeting with the legislators set, and when is that?
That's been scheduled for January 8th at 3:30 p.m. And then, of course, we have a variety of other folks who are not in the local delegation who are very important to us as this conversation unfolds. The co-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee, the co-chairs of the Ways and Means subcommittees, and even staff in the Capitol building, Legislative Fiscal Office, who do the analysis. And we're in the process of arranging and already have met with a number of those folks, even as late as last week while I was in Salem.
Cover it. So this is just basically a math calculation for you here on the difference between the expenditure side and then the state funding revenues. So I think under the next agenda item, we have some more information for you on details of that number and talking with financial advisors, but that is the identified funding need.
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, this is intended to be a comprehensive cost estimate. And we've been very clear that we want to make sure that the numbers that we put forward are accurate, are based on the best information we have available to us, and that they will be numbers that we will not exceed at any point in this project. Our hope certainly is that if anything, if any numbers change, they change in a downward direction, and that's certainly our goal. So that's what we have for you here, and then if you'd like, we can transition, if there are no additional questions on this portion, we can transition into the next discussion, Mr. Chair, to talk about so we finished the scoping study to talk about the replacement update, sort of timeline and schedule options, and this is where we'd be looking for some direction, some initial direction from the board.
Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do have one question related to costs. And I'm going to ask, maybe this is what the associated project costs involve. So when the Wayne Morse Courthouse was proposed, it was proposed somewhere between $70 and $75 million. Completion was $96 million. So it's about an 18 to 20% increase than what was originally proposed. And obviously in a project, I can only think of maybe Hamilton Construction, building bridges, and Clint Eastwood movies. There's very little projects that actually come right at budget. And so my question, and as someone, I've been involved in building development for a long time. And sometimes it can be challenging to get right at budget. So my question is the $66.5 million kind of built in? Is that some of the cost built into potential adjustments that have to be made when the project's being built?
Absolutely. There is a percentage set aside for a contingency that is at the discretion of the county.
I think that's important to make sure you make note of, because of the fact I just remember clearly what was proposed for the federal courthouse and what the actual end cost was when it was completed. And 20% is a pretty significant increase on a project. By the way, that included some areas actually being lopped off.
I understand.
Yeah,
I did not work on the project, but I'm familiar with the
Yeah, so I
story.
just want to make sure that that piece of it is really explained to the public, that we've got built-in costs here on the in case.
Correct. We have a risk contingency
Very
set
good.
aside for that.
Very good, thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Farr.
Just a quick question, considering the Multnomah County Central Courthouse project, a similar process, similar kind of built-in risk?
Yes, and they're further along in their process, so their distributions of cost is a little bit different. So if you were to look at the ratio of construction to associated project costs, your project versus their project, the distribution would be different. That's because they're actually building, the county, Multnomah County has actually released some of their contingency into the construction, and they had to do that to pay for some overages and that sort of thing. But ultimately, yes, the logic is exactly the same in terms of how we are accounting for costs, with the exception of that contingency, which has been pushed into construction.
Thank you. My question on that regard, Mr. Chair, was just to continue to build my confidence in the fact that you're doing due diligence in your research and due diligence in your projections. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You know, one other comment that we are taking great care to develop a project that reflects the values and needs of this community here in Lane County. So you've heard Multnomah County reference. I think we've also are learning some lessons from what's happened there and recognizing it's a different community than Lane County. And while this is a facility, we want to achieve all of the operational efficiencies, access, safety and security, and potential we have to actually improve our public safety system. We're also leading with a value of creating a municipally modest facility that reflects the history and culture of our past, our present, and our future.
Thank you. So I have one quick question, and that's about furnishings. Is that part of the associated project cost?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I know that got to be an issue with Multnomah County. They didn't budget in their furnishings. That's what they had to use some of that contingency
There were a
for.
number of things that were not originally planned for, but we have accounted for that.
Good. I just want to, because it really, I appreciate the level of effort that you made in trying to bring in entire project costs. Quite often, you know, and I've been guilty of this myself sometimes as an engineer, you always talk about the construction cost, and you forget to mention there's a bunch of soft costs behind that, you know, including the engineering, architecture, you know, everything else that goes into these structures, and that's really what's built into that associated project cost. And we're even seeing your cost right now, DLR's cost, Sherwood, Robertson, Sherwood, you know, Cameron McCarthy, you know, that's all part of that associated project cost, our cost for our staff, and you know, the cost to clear title on the land, you know, that all that's built into there. So really feel comfortable with the level of effort that was made to get to this, a dollar amount that we can talk about publicly that's not going to change drastically, hopefully, and has everything from inflation factors built in for when the estimated construction is. Of course, as I mentioned that, I will note if there's some reason this project gets delayed, there will be associated increases in cost with that delay.
I would agree.
I think in our next item, we're going to start talking about timeline a little bit. So I really appreciate the work you've done to go all in on these costs.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, you just hit the nail on the head there, that we had a lot of discussion about, well, what cost should we represent? And we started in 2016 when we developed a project charter for this project. We said one of our values is transparency, that we're going to be open and transparent. And so just giving you a number that just shows construction costs is not giving you the full picture. This is intended to reflect our all-in estimated costs for the project from start to finish. And I want to make one other comment that we talked about as the court administrator mentioned a 40 to 50 year operational horizon. That's what the National Center for State Courts looked at, and what that we're building this to be a 100-year building. So we'll talk about local funding needs and how that could be structured, but we're looking at a 40 to 50 year operational horizon and a 100-year life cycle for the facility.
So before we move on to the next item, I just want to do a process check with the board here, because it is 10 after 12, or a little bit past 12. This next item's estimated to be another 60 minutes.
No, I think it will be less than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we think it'd be less than that. I want to look to the board if you're okay if we're plowing ahead, because we do have a full afternoon also. We have a substantial public hearing and some other, and another land use.
I would like to have lunch between now and 1:30.
I think, Mr. Chair, we can do our presentation in about 10 to 15 minutes, and then it's just
wrap up
time.
by 12:30 then, so we have an hour for lunch here.
I'm going to give up my yoga and my wellness and all the other things that our HR department tells me I should be doing, but I'll be giving that up. I won't give up food, though.
Yeah.
And I've given up the Moving Ahead Steering Committee meeting that I had at noon, so, but I do have a little bit of personal business to attend to before 1:30.
Yeah, so if we can, let's see if we can march ahead then.
Okay, thank you. So the next slide, and Alex, if you can jump into, we'll talk about timeline for you. So you have the cost estimate, revenue estimate, and what we're looking for from the board today is preliminary direction regarding next steps. And we recognize that we have 2 new commissioners coming on in January. It's our intent to come back at the first meeting in January with an update and sort of refresher. But you know, there are a couple of ballot measures that we could potentially look at, and so we're wanting to get some initial direction from the board on your thoughts related to timing. And we also have some survey results from a recent voter survey that was conducted that we'd like to share with you as well. So Alex is going to take the overview of timing here.
Commissioners, you have in your packet an attachment that also outlines this same information. And as Administrator Mokrzycki indicated, there is nothing scheduled at the moment for the January 8th, 2019 meeting with respect to timeline. So we do have an opportunity to provide information to the newly seated board regarding these scenarios. But there are, as you're well aware, you have to back up from the election dates of any year, and there are statutory requirements about when the clerk and the public needs to see certain documents related to those elections. So we've provided information about the May 21st, 2019 election and the November 5th, 2019 election, and sort of done these possible scenarios where we back up in time. There's 3 elements that staff have identified that we think you need to consider, and you'll recall these from our previous efforts at putting things in front of the voters of Lane County, both with respect to the jail levy and the vehicle registration fee proposals that we made. The first one is the ballot measure language itself. So the ballot measure language, which is collectively considered to be the title, includes a caption, a question, and a summary. And those documents have to be provided to the clerk via that, what we've highlighted there in bold as the SEL 801 form. And that has to be to the clerk at a date certain, and it's 80 days prior to the election. So previously, when we've done these kinds of efforts, we have had some meetings where we've publicly discussed and invited the public to come in and comment on the draft ballot measure language. And so, as you'll see, we did, in these timelines, provide 2 meetings that would allow for public comment to come in and discuss with you proposed ballot measure language. The second thing that we've typically done is to provide some sort of additional assurance to the voters about the election and about, if they vote yes, what they can expect from the board. So you'll recall with the initial jail levy, we had, for example, that we promised an annual audit. For the vehicle registration fee, we actually passed an ordinance and then referred that to the public. Both of those require some sort of public documents, and the promise that we made in the jail levy was done in the ballot measure order, and in the vehicle registration fee, it was actually an order. Staff is recommending that you do another, the vehicle registration fee was an ordinance. It was in the lane code. And so staff in this instance is recommending an additional lane code insertion that would be designed to ensure that the public understands that there would be no spending of a local ballot, of local bond money that was produced through an election unless the state funding is also present. So that is the idea behind the ordinance. And as you can see, ordinances require a first reading, separated by a number of days before a public hearing occurs, and then you can go on to additional public hearings for the ordinance. And so that's what we've outlined in these as well. And then the final thing that we've put into this element is this discussion about an informational pamphlet. You'll recall that in both of those examples where we've done previous money measures to the public, we've discussed about the sort of alternatives to a state-issued voter pamphlet versus a locally produced voter information pamphlet. And so we've built into the timeline that as well. So if we could move to November, you'll see the exact same thing. The cell 801 to the clerk has to be done by August 16th. You back up 80 days and for allowing for the number of meetings that we have in the down weeks and that sort of thing, we would really have to initiate this work in the latter part of June to qualify for that election. So the staff recommendation here is that you pursue the timeline for the May election, and there's at least 3 good reasons that rationale that staff had for that recommendation. The first is Administrator Mokarski referenced the polling. The polling that we did was targeted at the high propensity voters. Those are the 3 of 4 or the 4 of 4 participation in the last 4 elections. And so the data that we have about voter behavior is based on that higher propensity voter. The higher propensity voter typically participates in the May election. The other reason is that, as I discussed in the legislation, these decisions about capital budgets, including state bonding authority, are typically pushed to the end of the session. And the capital construction discussions for all the bonding proposals that are made in the state really start in the latter part of May. They proceed through June, and we expect the legislature, adjourn sine die in early July. And so the timing would be very good to have a local election result at the same time those conversations are going on in Salem. And finally, staff is aware, we've done a lot of work with our local government partners and our taxing district partners to sort of project into the future what is coming down the pike with respect to other money measures. And there are many. And so the sooner we're able to sort of get into that queue, we avoid potential competition with other money measures that are coming in the future that we're aware of. And so the recommendation, again, is really to begin this work in early January and proceed to the deadlines for the May election.
So briefly, we'll jump into the next slide. We conducted a survey, as Alex mentioned, of 382 frequent voters, 3 of 4 and 4 of 4 voters in the last 4 elections. The poll was conducted between November 26th and December 8th. Margin of error is plus or minus 5% with a 95% level of confidence. We tested a 29 cents per $1,000 of assessed value for a 20-year bond issuance bond measure. This was reflective of the total local funding needed that you were shown previously. But on the left, on the bottom left, you see before, at the beginning of the poll, before any arguments or context is given to voters, the number of high propensity voters that favored a measure was 47%. Those who opposed was 44% and 9% unsure. And then at the end of the poll, after various arguments were presented, and we'll walk through which arguments were resonated most with voters, the level of support increased by 6%. So we went to 53% in favor, 43% opposed, and 4% unsure. The two messages that resonated most, and I should say that the one message that produced the largest increase in support among all other, across all categories of high propensity voters, was the guarantee that matching funds, that no local money would be spent unless funds from the state of Oregon were achieved. So 63% of respondents favored the measure if Lane County would not collect the local funds unless the state funding is approved. Likewise, 61% of respondents favored a measure if Lane County was able to receive up to $94 million in matching funds. So that, you know, we've said for quite some time that we've known that the courthouse is a significant challenge. The ability now to tap into nearly $100 million in state funding to offset the impact of the local community is a significant impetus for why we are where we are. The other measure, the other priorities that voters indicated they supported were providing adequate access for people with disabilities. 62% of voters supported, favored the measure when they understood that there would be additional access for people with disabilities. When they understood the safety and security improvements, such as safe areas for victims and families, a separate space from criminal offenders, upgraded security systems, and separate space for opposing parties, 61% of voters supported the measure. When they saw that this would strengthen the justice system and the community by expanding specialty courts, as Commissioner Farr referenced, such as Veterans Court, Mental Health Court, Drug Court, 61% supported the measure. And when they understood that Lane County's population has more than doubled since the existing courthouse was constructed 60 years ago, and it is visited by over 600 people every day, 59% of voters supported. So that gives you an idea of the of voter sentiment, and that is all the information, Mr. Chair, that we have for you today. So we'll take discussion, and we would like, again, some preliminary direction from the board so that we can move into the new year with clear next steps.
Thank you, and I'll just make a quick note of one, how important it is to demonstrate that local match due to the history of some previous projects of the state. This is again my experience as sitting on the AOC Court Facilities Task Force for a number of years and seeing the statewide picture. Tillamook County was awarded bonding authority and failed to get their state match, and the legislators are sensitive to that. So the ability to demonstrate state match during the legislative session, I think, will be critical to us gaining approval. And there are legislators that want to jump Clackamas County ahead of us. So we have to be sensitive that we're not the only county in line, and we currently sit number one, but we could lose that place if it's felt we can't come up with local match. So I just will note that. And the other thing I want to note real quick is, if we choose today to start towards May, that doesn't preclude the new board in January from changing course. But if we don't move forward towards May today, we will preclude that board's choice because staff really needs to start work now on a May election. So with that, I would recognize Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I felt like I needed to comment on this first because this isn't going to affect me. I'm out. So I'm done. This is my last board meeting. I'm out of here. And my next career is probably going to be working on federal issues, and I won't even be engaged with Lane County anymore. So I'm kind of done here. But I wanted to kind of set the tone a little bit as you move forward on, and this is just, it's basically comments, thoughts, that's about it. I was hoping there would be a little bit of scoping for the butterfly lot, but it looks like the farm's being bet on the city hall lot, and I understand that. I get that. And the reason why I say that is because the last few weeks, and it's nice this is my last meeting because I can just be frank and blunt is all I want. I believe the Eugene City Council right now is very shaky. And to me, and I'm not talking about Eugene's staff, I'm talking about the council. I think they proved that with the Highway 99. Lane County came out, bailed out the city of Eugene on this one. What happened right here? Eugene City Council wasn't sure. They finally last night decided, oh yeah, maybe so. And in order for this to be successful, you've got to have a partner you can absolutely depend on. And right now, I'm not sure you can say, gee, I can depend on the Eugene City Council to be a partner on this, especially with regards to the real estate transaction that's going to occur. So with Lane County purchasing the City Hall lot, City of Eugene purchasing the Butterfly lot. Right now, it just seems like, in a month ago, 2 months ago, I'm not sure I would have seen that. But right now, it feels like it's shaky, and hopefully John and the rest of the staff can get the council to say, hey, wait a minute, this is what it's going to accomplish, because I'm not sure I've ever seen a community tear down a city hall without a real plan. But that's what happened here, and that's been vacant now for a while. And so these are just comments I'm just providing as you go down this road. You need to, and this is really going to be up to the 3 board members here. You're going to have to sit down with members of the council, make sure they are ready to go on this, because if you lose a partner, this whole thing could blow up and really be a problematic. So those are some thoughts there. The other is, the optics right now. We have the homeless folks in here today. You're going out in May for a bond measure for this kind of money. I'm just going to throw that out as well, because I think that that's something to you're going to have to figure out a narrative on this one. And I can't help you there. I have no clue how to deal with that one. So I think Commissioner Farr probably seems to have a handle on some of that as much as anybody. So hopefully you can come up with something there. And then finally, on the real estate transaction that's scheduled today, I guess the question I have is, shouldn't this have been scheduled with the new board? Because again, I'm kind of uncomfortable about voting on a real estate transaction when I'm not here. So that's really my question on that. But those are just some thoughts, concerns right now. And I believe you're going to have to work very, very diligently with the Eugene City Council to make sure they're on board, because you need to show my good friend, Senator Johnson, who I know quite well, I've known her for a long time, you need to show her that this is actually going to happen, because she's in a very, very influential and powerful position in the legislature. And I've been told that there's a chance, it looks like, some folks may be able to go meet with her personally, which I would highly suggest. You need to do that. That's going to be really, really important to do. But those are just some overall thoughts I had, and if you have a response, that's great. But I just want to kind of lay those out, and just to give you my thoughts on where some of the challenges may be, and that where I think that it'd be very, very important for the 3 members of this board plus the 2 new members to really sit down with leadership of the Eugene City Council and say, we need you on this one, and don't bail on us. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I think that the guidance we're getting from Mr. Kyler about the timing of local decision and the state decision. The state decision is whether or not to follow the recommendations of the Chief Justice and the Governor in the recommended budget. They usually do that. We need to make sure that we are meeting with at least our local legislators to make sure they know that is an ask on our part. As far as a decision about whether to adopt a kind of May election date or November election date, I think we should focus on the May election date right now. And the reason for that is also just mentioned by Mr. Kyler that in my experience with the legislature, both as a staff person and a senator, that a lot of the major financial decisions of the legislature get made in the period of April and May, privately in April, publicly in May. And so if we have a legislative delegation behind us, a governor behind us, a chief justice behind us, then when we work out the language of a proposal and we keep pushing for a May date, I think it has a very good chance of coming together. In terms of the site, my understanding is that the decision by both the city and the county to purchase the City Hall lot is all but done. The city and county have agreed to a price. They've agreed to the exchange of the lots. They've had lots of due diligence done in terms of the appraisal of these properties, and I'm not sure what we're waiting on, but my understanding is that all of those decisions are now in the hands of the lawyers that are doing the paperwork. And as a lawyer, I wouldn't just say, well, it's just paperwork. It's very important that it be done correctly, but the policy decisions by the board, by the city council, by the county administrator, city administrator, all that has been done. There's really nothing that needs to be done that I could be informed or misinformed, but I don't think I am. I think it's pretty much going to happen. And so if it's not, somebody better tell me right away, because I don't really want to have a meeting on January 9 to talk about building a courthouse on a lot that we don't own and we're not going to own. So yeah, I would like to be informed if that's not accurate, but I think it is. I think a lot of planning's been done. And to answer your question, Alex, about which timeline, I think that the three commissioners that are here that'll be commissioners on January 9, I think we need to be in a position, I think we really are all in a position to be able to answer the questions of the local legislators and thus the public's questions about how this is going to unfold. I think we're in really good shape. I think that more people hear about this. They'll realize it's a really good thing for the community, not just today, not just tomorrow, but into the foreseeable future, into a 50-year timeline, into a possible 100-year timeline. To me, that's a really good thing we can do for the community.
Thank you. So far, I've heard support from two of us for the staying on the May timeline. Is there head nods on the May timeline around? Then I think we can kind of wrap that part of the discussion up. Maybe really quickly deal with the next item, which will answer Commissioner Sorensen's question, which is Order 1812 in the matter of delegating authority to the county administrator to complete the purchase of the former City Hall lot from the City of Eugene and to sell the Butterfly lot to the City of Eugene and the Urban Renewal Agency of the City of Eugene. And we have Mr. Cheney here to brief us on that really quickly, and hopefully we can deal with this in moments.
Commissioners, I'll be really quick then. As the package says, we entered into a contract to sell the Butterfly lot to the city and for the city to sell the former City Hall lot to the county, providing that certain conditions were met, and they're listed in the agreement. I should also mention it in the Urban Renewal Agency of the City of Eugene, because we're selling the Butterfly lot, the northern portion, to the city itself as a site for a future City Hall, and the southern part of the site to the Urban Renewal Agency for redevelopment as a part of the original public square. But we have a contract to do that, and the contract has certain conditions that have to be met. And as of last night, as of yesterday, all those conditions have been met. The decision, the appeals period for the quiet title action has lapsed, and we filed a satisfaction of judgment today with the court. And so all the conditions have been met in the agreement, so now we have a contract to go through with the transaction. What we did not do when we came to the board originally for the authority to enter into the transaction was we did not come to the board to ask the board to authorize the county administrator to actually execute those documents. Since these are to be recorded deed documents, I think it's really important, based on my experience of the last 3 years, to make sure the person signing these has explicit authority for the board, because they're going to be on the books for a long time. And so with that, the motion ahead of you is not to plow new ground, but just to authorize the county administrator to execute the documents, transfer the funds, and close the deal.
Thank you. Commissioner Farr.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I move that the county administrator be delegated authority to complete the purchase of the former Eugene City Hall lot from the City of Eugene and sale of the Butterfly lot to the City of Eugene and Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Eugene.
Second.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Farr, seconded by Commissioner Sorensen to approve Order 1812. Discussion to the motion. Seeing and hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. With that, I think we are going to recess and move whatever items we didn't get to this morning to the end of the day in the afternoon, and we will be back in public session at 1:30 here in Harris Hall.